everybody, welcome to the build video for the EasyJet. It's a simple to build, easy to fly EDF jet for RC, 64mm fan, very quick, cheap, easy to build. So a good introduction if you want to get started. First step we're going to build the wing. So for that we're going to need the piece of foam, which you should have already cut out for the wing. As you can see, kind of floppy at the minute, so you also need material for the wing spar, which is going to stiffen it up. Sharp knife, and these ones with the blades that you can break off when they get blunt are really good, because a sharp blade makes all the difference. And even the cheap disposable ones of these are more than good enough for the task. Metal straight edge is going to make things much easier because you can cut nice precise straight lines, and the design of the jet is deliberately almost entirely made of straight lines. So if you've got a metal ruler and a knife, you can cut precisely and accurately all the pieces you need very quickly. So it's designed very deliberately that way. You'll also need some wide tape. I'm using painter's tape for this first stage, and hot glue. So if your hot glue gun is warmed up, your knife's got a nice sharp blade, let's get going. Okay, first thing we're going to do is install the wing spar. Now I've transferred little reference lines either side for the front and back of the 6mm square spar, so that you can transfer those from the plans with biro when you cut the sheet out. I'm using 6mm square. This is pine, just from the local DIY store, super cheap wooden molding. They have a big rack of different sizes, and 6mm square. I've been flying the jet now, I've probably flown 50 flights on it, on this spar, carrying a pretty heavy battery, about a 2800 4S, and it has proved to be more than strong enough. But if you're a particularly aggressive flyer, you're going to be flying heavier batteries, or you're just a bit more risk averse than I am, and you don't want the wing to fold up in flight. What you can easily do, this comes in different sizes, so the 6mm depth needs to match the foam, but front to back I think you can get like a 6 by it's either 10 or 12, so almost double the size. Add a bit more weight, add a huge amount of stiffness. So if you want to, you can go up a size, but you don't need to. So what we're going to do, get the metal ruler, line it up on the front two marks for the wing spar. That's nice and precise, there we go. And it's a bit scary and counterintuitive having cut this piece out, cut it in half, but that's exactly what we're going to do. So straight down the straight edge. Going to move my hand along just to stop it sliding. And one more. There we go. Is that separated? Not quite. So if it hasn't quite gone, then you can just lightly run the knife through again. And 2 light passes tends to be more accurate, and you get a nice clean cut. And of course, having not used a straight edge, I fell off the straight line. C'est la vie. Okay, there we go, that's good enough. Now what we're going to do is get the back half of the wing and remove 6mm square, which is how it's marked on the plan. We can check this against the size of the spar. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to remove the thickness of the spar from the wing material. So if you're using a thicker spar, then you just adjust to remove a slightly thicker a thicker piece of foam. So the end result is the wing is the exact size and shape of the overall outline on the plan. So, and you can use carbon or whatever for a wing spar if you want to. Doesn't really matter what you use, as long as it's strong enough. So this pine's good enough, and it's incredibly cheap, which is why I like it. But if you want to go with something a bit more high-tech, that's fine. So we put those bits together, and we can see that that fits just fine. And in actual fact, where I've got that split, where I've gone off with my knife, it's no big problem. I'll just drop a little bit of glue in there. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm actually going to flip it over. I'm going to work from underneath. There we go. Put the wing together, line up all the bits. I've already cut the edges of the spar on a slight curve to match the profile of the wing. And what we're going to now do is tape that together with the, where I put it, there you go, with this painter's tape, or masking tape as we call it in the UK. I think US it's called painter's tape. So let's pull off a piece of tape. Why can I never get an edge? Because I've got no fingernails. There we go. So line up this end, push the pieces together, and of course that's going to be a bit messy. Let's put that up there a second. There we go. So what I'm doing is just pushing the front and back together to make sure there is no gap, and that wing spar is a nice tight fit where I've got it. Let's put that tape on that first piece. Now we can swap to the other end, hold those tight, lay the tape flat across there. Let's get my hand out of the way, holding those together, push the tape down. Okay, that edge is nice. And now I'm just going to slightly redo that one to get the tape nice and straight with no kinks in it. There we go. So what we now have is a wing held together with tape. And if you pick it up, it'll flex like that on the tape. I'm going to cut that little bit of excess off just because it's going to be quite annoying. There we go. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to open up. Now I'm going to use that tape as a hinge. So pull a bit off there as well. I'm going to use that tape as a hinge. And I'm going to open up that back angle like that. So now you can see there, I've got the wooden edge exposed. What I'm going to do is going to get my hot glue gun, pull that out of the way, and I'm going to put some glue all along that wooden spar. Don't need too much. Same at the other end. There we go. And then we put that down, push the wing together, and I'm going to grab a little bit of scrap foam and I'm going to rub that along to remove all the excess glue from that top piece. And then we're going to hold that nice and tight, pushing that back edge in, and let that glue dry. Give it about a minute, should be enough. There we go. And you can probably guess what's going to come next. Because we now have one glued edge and one floppy open edge. First thing I'm going to do is drop a tiny bit of glue into that gap where I went wrong with my cut. There we go. Close that up. Get my bit of scrap foam and just pull that excess glue away. There we go. Perfect. Now we can open up that edge. Get our glue gun, run a bead of glue all the way along. Looks a bit light there. Okay. Same procedure, push it down flat, push the spar in nice and firmly, scrap foam, remove excess glue. There we go. push everything down, hold it together, and let's give that a minute. Got a bit of excess glue, you can just pull it off with your fingers. Although the nature of this plane is not really one for getting too fussy about the last bit of perfection on the finishing. It's designed to be quick and easy to build, so you can get it out and about, fly quickly, crash quickly, build another one. So if you're after some super nice, high scale, accurate jet, this is not the one. Go to JetWorks online. Okay, there we go, that's nicely glued. I'm actually going to leave the tape because it slightly covers up the wooden piece. So we can see now our wing is suddenly much stiffer than it was, but we're actually going to do one more thing to stiffen it up a little bit further. So I've got some more tape. This is shiny, thin plastic packing tape, the sort you put around boxes. Usually comes in, there's that horrible sort of brown colour, or maybe sometimes clear, but you can get it in colours. Go on the internet, eBay, Amazon, whatever is relevant in your location, and you'll find you can get stuff in all sorts of colours. I got bright red, bright blue, whatever. What we're going to do is tape the complete underside of the wing. That does two things. Firstly, it adds quite a lot of strength, surprisingly, because when the wing starts to bend, it stops the foam splitting because the tape's holding it together. The other thing it does is it makes the underside easy to wipe clean. If you're landing in wet grass or it's muddy, it makes the underside of the plane much easier. It doesn't get all covered in horrible stuff from your field, if your field is like the one I fly at. So the first thing I'm going to do, so I'm going to remove this painted tape. Okay, a little bit left behind, that's fine. We can just grab that in a couple of goes. There we go. That stuff's really sticky. You can see in a couple of places the hot glue has got it to stick a little bit more enthusiastically, but that's okay. We can just get that off with a bit of a blade. There we go. That's probably good enough. It doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to cover it up with the other tape anyway. But you can just see where the tiny bits of hot glue coming through that crack, which is fine. That's as it should be. That shows we've got a good consistent join all the way across. So, colour tape. And we're just going to do strips, starting at one end, coming to the other end, and then trim the edges with the blade later on. Now, one tip that makes it easier to do, I think, is pull out a long enough piece of tape. There we go. Stick one end down to the table wherever you are. Let's see if we can get this about right. Put that up to the corner. We're going to go down to there. There we go. And then gently lay that tape down like that. There we've got an edge, and then I can just get my blade, trim that. So what that's allowed me to do is get that tape nice and flat with no bends or crinks in without having anybody help me. And I didn't pull it very tight before I pull that end down, because if you put the tape on with tension, then it will pull the wing up into a curved shape. So the trick is just keep it nice and smooth so you don't get any kinks in the tape. Just that will make it look a bit nicer. And then get a cloth or something, and then you can smooth it down onto the surface of the foam, get it to stick nicely. You'll probably get a couple of little wrinkles and kinks in. It's almost unavoidable, but they'll push out pretty nicely if you're careful. There we go. And that's our first piece cut on. So we're going to repeat that process just all the way from the back of the wing to the front of the wing until the whole thing is covered. And voila, all taped up. Tape's slightly overlapping. You see those slightly darker stripes. It's because this stuff is a bit see-through. Messed up a bit there, but that's all good. It's EasyJet, not the swanky jet. So let's pull the whole thing off, flip it over, and now with our sharp knife, if you're uncomfortable going along the foam, because you might start to cut into the foam, you can use your metal straight edge. Otherwise, if you're happy to wing it, pardon the pun, sorry, that was honestly not deliberate, you can just do that, and there's the excess coming away. Same down around that wingtip. There we go. Flip to the other side. Let's get that out of the way. Just cut that. There we go. That's quite annoying, but there we go. Okay. Wingtip again. In fact, let me just show you leading edge. Let's use the metal edge. There we go. So metal edge, blade, straight down the side. You see how quick and easy that is. Makes all the difference. And in fact, on these trailing edges, I'm going to do the same thing. Now, be careful on the trailing edge because there is a slight shape. There's a flat bit in the middle, which you'll see later is where the fuselage connects. So we're going to start from that inside edge, all the way back. That piece can just tear off. Other wingtip. So same routine, line it up against the foam. Last but not least, we've got this little straight in the centre. I'm just going to do that by hand. Speed. There we go. So now we've got a nice stiff wing, taped on the underside. That's much more sturdy. And the last thing I'm going to do tape-wise on this stage is I'm going to go back to the painter's tape, and I'm going to run a piece of painter's tape over the top of the spar, just to make it a little bit less noticeable. So you don't have to do this. This is just my choice. Got a few wrinkles there. Let's pull those out. Painter's tape you can pull up slightly and replace if you haven't got it quite right, and it doesn't seem to mind too much. There we go. You see there's a few lumps and bumps where the hot glue is just sticking up a bit. Doesn't matter at all, won't make any difference to how this thing flies. As I've said, if ever there was a plane that you're going to be a perfectionist when you're building it, this is not the one. This is designed to be quick, simple, throw it together, get out and fly. There we go. And then that little bit of tape. Oh, come on, buddy. There we go. Okay. There we go. So we now have a nice, stiff, rigid wing. Wipe down on the underside if you land on anything muddy or horrible. Now we're going to cut out and hinge the ailerons. Right, on to the next step. We're going to cut and hinge the ailerons. So the first thing we're going to do is cut the 4 little short cuts that are the edges of the ailerons. Again, if you've transferred these lines from the plan, you can just cut straight through. It's pretty straightforward. They're 25 millimeters deep front to back. So if you're unsure where the front edge of the cut needs to be, that's the dimension. So that's 1, 2, 3. You'll see again I'm doing 2 cuts. You'll also notice I'm cutting with 1 finger sticking out of the way with a sticking plaster on it. So 2 things to say about that. One, when you're using a sharp knife like this, be really, really careful because you don't want to cut your finger. Although in actual case, also be really careful when you're washing the dishes with sharp kitchen knives because they can cut as well. Just saying. Okay, so that's 4 cuts put in. Now I'm now going to turn the wing over onto the other side, and I'm going to cut along, ready to make the hinge. If you've ever built one of the flight test planes, then you'll know exactly how this step goes. If you haven't ever built a flight test plane, what the heck? Build one, they're brilliant. I'm going to mark 25mm with a biro at each end of this, just so I can be sure that I've got the exact right point. There we go. So here's the first one. So what we're going to do is put our steel edge against that. It's exactly the right length, and we're going to cut along. We're aiming to not quite cut through completely, so we're aiming to leave the little bit of the top skin of the foam intact. Now it doesn't matter if you accidentally cut too far, we can fix that later, but as it happens, if you cut most of the way, there you go, you can see that's gone nicely and it will bend and it's hinged. So that's the first one done. Let's go up to the other end, same procedure, mark 25mm just to make sure I get the right spot with the biro. Same thing at the other end, 25mm, there we go. Put that around just to get at it, squeeze down those bits of wrinkles in the tape. So the odd wrinkle really doesn't matter. Maybe if you're an absolutely amazing pilot you could tell the difference, but I sure can't. Right, same thing, just a gentle cut, not pressing too hard, not aiming to cut all the way through to the bottom. Same thing, let's see if that will flex and bend. Yes, it will. Perfect. Okay, so we've got 2 hinges, and now we're going to get some tape again, packing tape. So we could use the blue that we've put on the underside, but I'm going to use clear tape on the top, just because I've got an idea of what I want to do for a colour scheme for this plane, and I'm going to have contrasting colours top and bottom, because this thing does fly really nicely upside down, and for orientation it's good visually. If you do get a little overexcited and carried away, which I can sometimes do, it's good to know which way up the plane is. There we go. So here's the first one. Whoa, darn it. I'm going to cut a fresh piece of tape because that's got some foam on it. You can see we're not editing out the mistakes here. This is a real life building. There we go. So again, you'll see what I do sometimes is put the tape on the edge of the table. It's just a neat, easy way to cut the end off. So I'm going to keep this. Oh, for God's sake. Third time lucky. Okay, let's stick it down to the plastic. So I'm going to keep this parallel to the trailing edge. There we go. And let's do the same thing. Let's just get a bit of manky old rag. Let's smooth that down. Beautiful, there we go. And that is your hinge. So now that gives it all the strength. So when I actually, now you need to cut through the tape again, because I've gone over the ends each side. That's fine, going over the end is fine. And now we have hinged aileron, and the hinge is made out of the tape. So other end, same thing. So same story, Try and keep it parallel to the trailing edge, push it down. Give it a rub. Sorry, you can see I've got really bad hay fever, so I've had a nosebleed. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, smooth that down. That looks perfect. At the end, recut those slots. And the same thing. There we go, got a nice hinge. So now we've got ailerons that will hinge up, they won't go down. So we need to cut the bevel in the rear. And again, to do this, easiest way to do it is to put a metal rule on there. And in fact, I'm going to get a bit of scrap foam and put it behind just so I can push. I say scrap foam, actually that's the already the side panel for the fuselage. It's already been cut out. And then I'm going to cut at an angle with the blade. And I'm going to take 45 or so degree, that's just drifting away from the ruler, there we go. There we go. Let's have a look how it looks. That looks absolutely fine. So there we go, now got nice movement in both directions. So we'll flip the other one over, get the ruler on it, and do the same thing, and I'll give you a close-up view of this one. Okay, so we'll line up our steel rule. It's probably just a little bit more than 6 millimeters back from the edge. It's maybe sort of 7 or 8 millimeters, 45 degrees ish. And we're angling the blade not just that way to give the bevel, but that way so we get a nice smooth cut along. Let's pull that edge off. There we go. And now, so you see I've actually cut too far on that one. That's a good example of how it doesn't really matter. So there's a bit of a gap, but we can just tape over that, and the tape will reinforce and make the hinge. So let's grab the clear tape. So you can see here is where I've cut too far and there's a gap. So clear tape. Double up the hinge. And there once again, recut the edges, number 1 and number 2. There we go, there's an aileron. So now we've got 2 ailerons that are hinged and will move freely up and down. In truth, you don't need a huge amount of movement when this thing is finished, but that's fine. What you will notice now, you can hear they're catching as the foam passes up and down. So the easy way to make that work, you just need a small gap there. You can get the blade and cut a tiny thin sliver of foam away, but it's just as easy to get something thin, piece of wire. This is push rod wire that I use. But a straightened out paper clip would work just fine, anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push that wire down into the gap and up again, just back and forth a couple of times, and that will just deform the foam enough that it'll open up a tiny clearance gap. There we go. So this one, if we still listen, and this one, so same on the other side, up and down that gap a couple of times, 1, 2, same at the other end, 1 and 2, Still got a tiny bit at this end. Honestly, that little doesn't really make a difference, but let's be geeky. Perfect. Okay, there we go. Two beautiful ailerons. On to the next step. Now we can flip this wing around and start to extend rearwards down here. Let's fit the rear fuselage. Okay, so now we've got our wing done. We're going to start adding some fuselage pieces. So the first thing I'm going to get is this rear floor. Should have two slots cut out where the formers are going to go, and they're going to hold the EDF unit. So this is a QX motor 64mm that I'm going to use in this aircraft, and that's going to slide into those two formers there. So we'll talk about those in a minute. First of all, we're going to glue this rear floor onto the wing. Now you should have transferred from the plan the center line mark. There's just a green reference with a biro line up the center of the wing and up the center of this rear fuselage piece. If you haven't done that, do it now. Go back and put that piece of paper back on and just transfer where that line is before you go on to the next step. Now I'm going to get some painter's tape. I'm going to put it upside down and I'm going to stick that with that piece about halfway on. So that's now sitting on the bottom of that rear floor piece. And I've got one of these building mats that's got crisscross lines, but if you haven't got something like that, you can do this with a ruler. What I'm going to do, I'm going to line up that center line on a line on my building mat. And then I'm going to push this into place and I'm going to line that up on the mat there as well. There we go. So there we go. From one end to the other, I've got a straight line. So that means I know I haven't got a boomerang in the tail that it's going left or right. That's all nice and square. So what I can do now is I can use that as a hinge, lift that up and run a little bit of hot glue into that gap there. Come on. There we go. And then I'm going to lower that down, put it back on that straight line, keep everything nice and straight, push those together, and get a bit of scrap foam and just wipe off the excess glue again. Keep that pressed in nice and firmly and give it about 30 seconds or maybe a bit more just for that glue to get nice and firmly set. So now I've got the rear section of the fuselage glued onto the wing in a nice straight line. So the next thing, not surprisingly, is get the piece for the front floor. Same again, I've got the biro mark down the center. Just get myself a bit of tape, upside down onto that piece. And same again, I'm going to get this back on that center line. I'm going to lift that up. I'm going to slide that into place with that line absolutely straight. Line everything up. That's a nice tight squeeze fit. There we go. And that now gives me a nice dead straight line. If I put my long metal ruler wherever I've put it, where have I put my metal ruler? There it is. Okay, if I were to put that down the fuselage, then I've got a nice straight line down there. Perfect. That's maybe 0.5 millimeter out, but that's frankly good enough for jazz. So, same thing, lift, a little bit of hot glue in there. And then leave that for a minute to let the glue dribble down a little bit, get it deeper into that gap. Let's get back on my center line, drop that back into place. There we are on that line. Piece of scrap foam. Excess glue removed. And again, give that a chance to set. So there we go. So now we have the beginnings of a shape. You can actually start to see how big the plane's going to be. The nose is going to extend with a curved piece on this right hand side here. So this isn't the full length yet, but you start to get a feel for the size of the plane. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our two rear formers, F1 and F2, and they're going to sit right here, and that's where the fan is going to go. So before we fit those, I have used a compass, I guess this thing's called, from the center of the two cross marks on the piece to draw a 32.5mm circle, I think, to give me the right size hole to fit my fan. You can adjust that, so measure your fan as accurately as you can, and then the goal is that that fan should fit snugly into that former, the wires behind like that. And this fan, you can probably see, I'll get maybe a close-up, has these little ridges that stick out. Those I've got at 45 degrees, and I've cut a little slot so they will feed in, so that will slide nicely on there. And F2, the one behind, same story. It's a very slightly snug fit onto the fan, so you can see that those two, come on, there we go, there we are. And then with the fan pointed the right way, you can see how that's going to drop in place with those two tabs that are sitting on the bottom, sitting into the place there. So cut those circular holes, cut out any slots or tabs that are needed for your fan to fit. If the holes are a bit tight, a little sandpaper on the inside of the hole just to make sure that they fit. They should be snug, but not so the foam is getting stretched or distorted when you fit the fan. And once you're happy that they are fitting, then we're ready to fit them to this lower piece. Now, the only other thing you need to do is you'll see that the motor sits behind the fan, and this wiring is going to have to pass forward. So the way I fit my motor, I have the wiring coming down at 45 degrees to the bottom corner. So what I can then do is, before I fit these, I can just cut out a little corner off the bottom of each of the formers, and that gives me a space when the side panel is on that I can pass the wiring through the side. And the other thing to do on these formers is to be careful that F1 is slightly bigger than F2. It's hardly enough to matter, but it's just a little bit, because the tail of the plane tapers down and gets narrower at the back, and this is just the beginning of where that happens. So F1 is slightly wider than F2. They should both be the same height. So once you're happy with those, then we can go ahead and glue those two formers into place. Right, so I've cut a little 45 degree off the corner of the former, and I've just checked that's going to make a gap big enough to pass my 3 motor wires through. So I'm going to put F2 in first. I'm going to put a little glue on either side at the bottom, and then a bit at the front and the back of the tab that will hold that in place in there. So a little bit of glue on there, bit on there, on those sides there, and then a bit on the front and on the back. There we go. And then I can slide that into place, and I've got the center mark marked on there as well, the center line, to make sure that's positioned correctly. Just make sure it's vertical as well. I'm just going to eyeball it because it's not really massively critical that it's perfect. If you're worried, then you can put a set square if you've got one from a geometry set. If you haven't got one of those, an old CD case will work just fine, because those are nice and square. Whatever you've got doesn't really matter, just anything with a nice precise edge. So that one is in just fine. Let's make sure we get this one with the cutout on the same side so our wiring can pass through. Same story. A little bit on the base there, a little bit on the base there on the sides, and then thin bead of glue on the front and the back of the tab. And that can drop into place there. Again, make sure it's lined up along the center line. Bit of scrap foam just to clean out that joint a bit, that's all good. Okay, and now we can see where our motor's going to fit. And the next thing we're going to do is we've got former F0, which goes, that's a little bit of glue, there we go. It's going to go right here at the front. And the gap, the cut through there, is to allow you to push batteries further forward into the nose. So if you're running small lightweight batteries, you might have to push them forward to get the correct CG. So that just gives you more leeway with battery movement. And all we need to do is put a little bit of glue on the bottom of each of these pieces here. 1, 2. And then we're going to position this flush with the front of the floor, and just make sure the gap on the sides to allow the foam is equal each side. And if you're at all unclear, again, get a piece of scrap foam, there we go, and you can just put one either side to make sure that that's sitting flush, and it is. And again, just make sure that it's vertical. But that all looks good. Let's just squeeze that extra glue out. That's nicely in place. So now we've got our 3 formers, and this is the first of the side panels, and what you'll see we're going to do now, I'll put one on the back so you can see it. These are going to fit against those side panels and down on the floor of the plane, and you can see where the side intakes are going to push in. But before we do that, so they've got something to push against, we've now got this floor doubler. You'll see that's got a cutout in front, that's going to poke through there at the front. Again, it's got a center line on, and that's going to sit right there. And what that will do is it gives you a surface for those side panels to go on. It strengthens the floor and the join between the front of the floor and the wing. If you're going to have any bumpy landings, let's say, and a bit of extra strength down there is going to do you no harm. So that's the next piece we're going to put in place, and when that's in, we're ready to put the sides in place. Now, so here we go, next step, let's get the floor across, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some glue across the front here, where it's going to go across the front there, one down each side, and then another strip down the middle. You want enough glue, you've got a lot of surface area there. If you put a huge amount of hot glue there, it tends to melt the foam, so go a little bit easy. And actually what you could do is you could use wood glue, PVA, or normal foam glue that comes out of a tube instead of hot glue, maybe just a bit of hot glue front and back to tack it down. But just for speed, I'm going to do the whole thing with hot glue. So let's get some on the front there, down the side, down the other side, and then down the middle. There we go, that will do. And then let's position, use that center line again, position that centrally there, get that line straight down the center, and then just nice even pressure. Hold that in place. There's a little bit of excess glue squeegeing out there, and I'm just going to run that bit of scrap foam down the edge to make sure that I haven't got glue getting in the way there that would stop my side panel sitting flush. So there we go, just give that a nice press down again, make sure everything's firmly in place. And already that front's got quite a bit stiffer, and that's even before we get the side panels on. Right, with that floor doubler in place, we're now ready to put our side panels on, because we've now got that floor there that we can push in this corner, get some nice strength in the front. So what I'm going to do next, I'm just going to grab a biro, because that's going to be quite useful for a visual mark. What I'm going to do is on the inside edge of this side panel, I'm just going to mark where, let's get that working on some paper, there we go. Just going to mark where F2 runs to, because what we're going to do, that's just where the back starts to break and go upwards. And what I'm going to do, because we're going to do this side piece that pushes in here, we're not going to glue that yet. So where I'm going to glue, I'm going to glue inside the straight edge on your side that you're looking at. That's that gap in there. So the gap on the floor, and vertically up that former, vertically up F1 and F2. So that gives me the side and the front. And then this back bit, I'm just going to put some glue on the bottom of the side panel, behind where that cutout goes for the air intakes for the jet. So just along this section here, up until where I made that biro mark. Because we're going to glue the tail later, because that's going to lift up, but we're going to do that later. So I'm going to pick this piece up for, or move it around a little bit for ease and speed. So in that front corner, up the side of F1, of F0, up the side of F1 and F2, up to the top, there we go. And then last but not least, on the side panel, up to my biro line, which is just about there. And then we turn that sideways. So let's push that piece level with the front of the floor. Push into that corner there. Push up against the side of F1, and let's get F2 and F3. Push the floor down, push that side in, there we go. Scooch your way to a little bit of extra glue there, which I'm just going to get with my finger. Just make sure that floor is pushed. Damn it. Okay, we'll have to put a strengthener in the back of F2. That's my bad for being a bit clumsy. But I guess that might happen to you, so we'll show you what to do about that in a minute. We'll just make another F2 and glue it on the back of that one. Actually on the front of that one. So that side is glued in place, and you can see now where that piece is going to push in, and that gives us the intakes from the side into the jet. Okay, let's quickly do some remedial work on F2. Okay, here we have a hastily cut out additional former to go on the back here. Just check that for size, make sure it fits, make sure that the fan will fit inside it, which it will. That's absolutely perfect. Okay, beautiful. So remembering that this is slightly narrower now than it is tall at this rear position, let's make sure we get it the right way up, and that looks perfect. So a little glue down those two sides and a bit on the front, and a good reminder that until the sides are in place, these rear formers are actually quite delicate, so try not to be as clumsy as I was. Okay, a little in the corner and down the front. There we go. Perfect. So that can push right into that corner, up against the side, down against the floor, and up against the former in front of it. There we go. That just gives me the strength back. And just make sure that there is no glue coming through that join. It's going to make the fan a tight fit. There we go. Perfect. So now we've got one side panel on, and what we can do next is push this intake into position, and to do that we're just going to run a bead of hot glue down, there we go, sort of this side panel here. We don't need to get all the way to the very, very front. If there's a little bit doesn't have glue on, that's no biggie. I'm going to get this way around so I can get at it. It's a little awkward to get in there, so you have to sort of reach from above with the glue gun, and then we just run some glue down that side there, all the way to the tip. I'm going to leave that a second to let that sink down the side into place, and then that side piece pushes all the way along right up to the tip. Just using my fingers to keep some pressure on there, and again, piece of scrap foam. And when we smear the excess glue away like that, and it pushes it along that joint, it gives you a really nice long surface area of glue and actually makes the joint a little bit stronger. So there we go, so that's glued nicely in place. Now what you can see is that side panel is slightly longer and has gone past the point, and that's because where those two pieces need to come together at the back of here, they're actually designed to come to a nice sharp point. So what I'm going to do now is down that center line I can make a vertical cut and just cut the excess away. Let me see if I can do this so you can see what I'm doing from that side. So I'm going to have a look there. It's kind of like that, straight down that center line, like that. Pull that away. Got a little bit down in that corner where I just couldn't get to it. There we go. Perfect. So now when we add our second piece on, we're going to trim it, the second one, before we glue it, so that when they come together we can put some glue up that face, they'll come together and there'll be a sharp edge on that trailing edge there. Okay, here's our second side piece. Let's just check that everything's going to fit correctly. That all looks fine. That's going to push into there beautifully. Perfect. So we're going to have the same process as last time. So on the inside edge, I'm just going to make a little mark as to where that second former is, because then I know I only want to put glue just as far as that mark, because we're going to do this back end later. So same as before, let's get our glue gun. It's a slightly long reach to there. Let's move that in a little closer. There we go. So working as quickly as we can, bead of glue down that front straight bit there and up the side of the front former, up these two formers, trying not to get too much, being a little careful there in the bottom, because we don't want to block up where the side, where the wires are going to go through. On the bottom of this side panel, just as far as the biro mark, and then same as before, flush on that front edge with the floor panel, push into that corner, push against those two side panels onto the formers F1 and F2. And a little bit of excess glue, I'm just going to squeegee that out of the way. There we go. And again, make sure this front corner is pushed fully into place up against the former there. There we go. And now you can start to see the beginnings of the shape. You can see where these air intakes are going to push. That last one can push in. And now you can see why we need to now trim this piece before we glue in that last piece there. Now it's a little funky, this one, because You can't quite push it in place to get the straight line exact. So we're going to do an attempt to get a rough trim in place, and let's see if that will push in all the way. Yeah, it will. There's a little blob of hot glue that's come through when we put the floor in. It's just getting in the way then. I'm just going to nick that out of the way with my blade. Come on, fella. There we go. And let's see if that now will push through. That will, and if I reverse this, I don't know if the camera can see it. I'll try and get a close up in a minute. You can now see where those two edges are going to come together, and I can just squeeze those and put some glue up that vertical face there. So let me just grab the camera and get a close up. There we go, you can see where that pushes in and those faces there, and that's where we can get some glue along that face, get that glued nicely in. Let's go for it now. We dribble down from above into that gap there. It's a little funky, but we can get in there. There we go, along to there, and then also on that vertical face inside. There we go. Give that a second for the glue to cool slightly, because where that foam is very thin, if the glue is too hot, it will melt it excessively. So we can push those in, and then we can squeeze that together at the rear edge. There we go. I'm just going to put some side pressure on there and use my fingers to squeeze that join together at the back. Bit of excess glue coming out. There we go. And now you can see we've got two smooth curved air intakes that go back to a sharp point at the rear. Right in front of where our fan is going to sit, right here. Okay, we're going to take a slight pause from sticking and gluing foam for a minute, because the next thing we need to do is get our fan set up and ready to be installed. So there's a couple of things you need to do there. First of all, connect up your ESC to your fan. I've got a QX motor 64mm fan here. It's a 3800 kV version, and I'm running it on 4S. And for this one, I'm building this one for a friend at the club, and he's given me an ESC he's already got. This is a Heli ESC, and actually it's a bit overkill for what we need. This is a 70 amp with a huge heatsink. I'm running 60 amp in mine, and because the ESC sits in the air inlet to the fan, it's got high velocity air blowing over it all the time, so it's got brilliant cooling. So check the specification for whatever EDF you're using, but I would imagine that you can get away with something a bit less chunky than this. So we've connected up a receiver to the ESC. I've bound with a battery, and then I've just put a little bit of throttle on just to make sure that the fan is going the right way and it's actually blowing out the back and it's not reversed and pushing air out the front. Now in my case, I got lucky first time around and my wires are connected correctly. But if it blows in reverse, all you do is unplug any two of the three wires going to the motor and just swap them over, and that will reverse the motor. Once we know we've got that running in the right direction, then we are ready to install the fan in the plane. Okay, the last thing we're going to do before we fit the fan is we're just going to glue up this rear section. Now you can see it's going to be tricky to get glue into this very narrow gap here, but in actual fact that doesn't matter. If you have a few, maybe 2 inches, 50 mil that doesn't have glue on it, that's no biggie, honestly, and you can always dribble a little bit into the corner and squeeze it with some foam. If you're bothered about that, then what you can do is, before you use hot glue, put some wood glue into the gap that's slow setting, gives you time, and then do the rest of it with hot glue, and that will work just fine. But in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to get our hot glue gun. We're going to put a bead of glue down this rear edge along here, pulling that side piece out of the way, and then we're going to do the same thing down the other side, starting quite far up the front there. There we go. Perfect. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to point the plane away from me. I'm going to pull those sides in, and then I'm going to push down. And that way, those edges are pushed onto the foam in front. And then I'm just going to slide them, make sure they're nice and flush. And I'm using the building board just to keep the whole surface flat, because it's not a curve, it just has a kink, and then this rear piece is flat, so it sits flat on the board. And then with a bit of that foam, we can just squeegee off that excess glue. And I'm going to hold that in place, just give it another few seconds, make sure that excess glue is squeegeed off there. There we go. While it's nice and soft like this, you can just rub off those little bits with your finger before it gets completely hard. There we go. That's pretty nice. And then that front section where it's not stuck, if that bothers you, what you can do is just turn the model like this, and you can actually just dribble a little glue into that corner. And use a piece of scrap foam to squeegee that along. You can do the same on the other side. There we go. And by putting a little bit of glue into that inside corner there and then squeegeeing it, what we're doing is we're forming a sort of an L-shape fillet of glue in that corner, and that's going to hold those sides nice and secure. Now that's pretty rigid. Okay, there we go. So now you can see we're starting to get a slightly tapered shape to the rear of the jet. It's one of my few concessions to not being boxy, because as you can see, this thing is built as a box. Okay, and with that nicely glued up and firm, next thing we're going to do is we're going to slide the fan into place. So I'm going to reach across and grab my fan, and I can disconnect the wiring at this stage. 1, 2, 3. Now in my case, my wiring is a little bit clunky because I'm building this for somebody else. His speed controller has 4mm plugs and my fan has 3.5mm, so I've made some little adapters. So these are a bit long and clunky, but hey, that's okay. So what we're just going to quickly do is just quickly eyeball. Let's put the fan roughly in position there. These are going to poke through to just in front of this former, which means my speed controller is going to come in the right hand side. It's going to sit in that air intake right there. And in fact, if I spin this around so you can see better on the camera, so there is my ESC where it's going to sit with this air being pulled in, cooling it nicely, and you can see there where those wires are going to go through into place for the motor. And I've cut it after the fact on these side pieces, but on the plan there is already a hole mark to cut through to pass your cables through into the front. And the other thing to measure is to make sure, I've had to lengthen the cables, make sure you've got a long enough cable so when you feed through from here into the front, your batteries are going to sit in this space, this front of the box, around this bulkhead. So I like to have a nice long battery lead, makes it much easier for plugging in and out. You could lose a little weight by maybe making that a little shorter. This one is 150mm from the ESC. Oh no, it's a lot more than that. I'm talking rubbish. It is about 400 millimeters, and you could probably get away with a little less. You can probably get away with about 200 if you're feeling, or 250 if you're feeling you want to save that tiny bit of weight from the wiring. But honestly, it's so much easier just to have a nice big cable. You can plug everything in nicely. So that's long enough. That's all going to fit. So in that case, we can get our fan. And remember, our cables are going to poke through the bottom there. So let's pull those through first of all. Rotate that around so they're in that bottom corner. And then let's slowly and gently slide that fan back into position. And those little slots on the side of the formers fit that fan, and then we slide into that rear former. There we go. This is not something you want to do in a hurry. You want to force it. I don't want to force it. So nice and gently, little by little, just easing it back, because you saw when I broke this former, these are a little fragile. That's just going in nicely. There we go. Back a bit further. Okay. There we go. So that is the EDF unit in place, and you'll notice I've got the curved intake rings still on the front of the fan, and that's important because we don't have a circular intake that connects up to these intakes here. We're basically pulling air inside a box. This curved surface on the front of the fan actually gives you quite a bit of extra thrust, and if you don't have that on there, you're going to lose some performance. And then if you poke, turn around so you can see the back, you can see that the fan protrudes out the back of these formers. Now, because I've had to put that extra former on, I've got 6 mil less to go up, but I've still got enough to slide on the duct that's going to sit on the back, on the rear of the fan. So that's okay. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to poke these wires through that corner until they're coming out of this front corner here, so I can connect them up to my ESC. So just giving you a close-up of those wires, I'm actually going to change the former, so when you look at the plan, there'll be a square cut out, not a triangle, just to give it extra space, because it is quite fiddly to feed those through. But if you can just see there, let's spin them around. There's those wires coming through that bottom corner, and I've color coded them, labeled them, so I can put them back on the same way I had them before. Of course, I can always check again and swap them over if their fans running backwards, but now they're a little bit less accessible now they're down there. I think it's a good idea to do that before you put the fan in place. Okay, let's connect up our ESC. Okay, so there's our ESC wires now plugged in. The ESC is sitting hard against that side surface there, and the power leads going through that hole in the side and coming through into our battery compartment, so that here we're going to have lots of spare cable to connect our batteries up. Now we need to lock this ESC in place, because at the moment it's kind of going to wobble around. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can put self-adhesive double-sided tape underneath it and stick it down to the wing. You can use self-adhesive Velcro, which makes it, in theory, removable, although it's not designed to be removable. You're going to have to hack a big hole in the bottom of the plane to get it out, so that's kind of messy, but you could do it. And in fact, on the other plane, I have swapped out an ESC by doing exactly that, cutting a hatch in the bottom, pulling it out and poking the new one in. The other way you could do it, and my preferred way, is to get a thin piece of wood. It can be anything, it can be balsa. There are things you can buy called craft sticks in the UK. They look like the thing the doctor will use to push your tongue down to ask you to say ah and inspect your tonsils. And if you glue one of those, let's flip to the other side just so I can show you. Glue a craft stick flat down on this surface here, because you get lots of nice wide surface area with the hot glue to glue that firmly down. And underneath it, running across, I actually put a cable tie with the end poking up, so that's locked underneath the wooden piece, and then I can close up the cable tie on the top, and that cable ties my ESC in place. So whatever you prefer, it doesn't matter as long as it's fixed in place. And then the other thing you can do, and I'm going to do now, is I'm going to put a piece of tape across here. I'm going to use painter's tape on top of this tape just to hold those wires down flush on the surface, keep them out of the way. Partly to cut turbulence into the fan and just to stop them flapping around. I don't think they can't really move. There's nothing going to happen there, but it probably just will keep everything that little bit tidy. The next step we're going to do is we're going to put the side panels for the air intakes on the side here. Now you should have here at the front a biro mark transferred from the plan that shows where the outside edge of that air intake goes. There's a cutout here where we're going to put our servo, and you'll see if we look from above at the back, at the moment it sticks out here at the rear, and what we're going to do is we're going to chamfer off the back there carefully with a blade, just to get that to be a better fit. Well, doesn't have to be perfect, but we'll get something that looks about right. So let's set up the camera for a close-up and make that piece. Okay, so I've cut both those side pieces now with the chamfers on, and we're ready to hot glue them in place. Now the bottom corner there aligns with the leading edge of the wing, and there's my biro mark from the plan, so I can see where the front goes. The back with that chamfer pushes in right against the side of the fuselage, and you can see the fuselage widens at the bottom. There's a little step there. And you can see there's a line also on the rear trailing edge of the wing that you can transfer from the plan. So you can see where this needs to go. And again, doesn't have to be absolutely down to the fraction of a millimeter, but close enough for jazz. And just make sure, because these are a little flexible, they can bend, just try and make sure it's in a nice straight line so it will line up with your leading edge. But again, if it doesn't perfectly, not the end of the world. And the last thing to say is, when you put glue on this thin chamfered portion, don't put any glue, hot glue, directly on the very thinnest part, because the hot glue will melt the foam. So I tend to put it more on the front piece here, and then as I push the foam in place, squeeze and try and transfer the glue to the trailing edge. The other thing you can do, rather than use hot glue, use something else, wood glue, foam safe glue. In fact, let's do that as an example. I've never done this on one of these, but let's give that a go. Let's put a little foam safe glue on that rear portion. PVA wood glue, as I said, would work just as well. Just so we've got something there that's not going to be melting the foam. But if you have to do it with hot glue, the prototype is built with hot glue, works just fine. Just be careful not to get it on the very thinnest part of the foam. So with that on there, that's from the leading edge, put a thin bead of glue down the bottom. Oops, got a bit of glue on my finger, doesn't matter. The servo cutout makes a nice little handle. Start at the front corner, get that down, now push the rear in against the side of the fuselage. Make sure that's in straight, sits with the line, and then just firm down with pressure just while that glue sets in place. just so you get a little bit of excess glue out the side there. That's all good. So that's the first side intake in place, and now we can start to see how that air intake will pull air in over the ESC here to cool it down and into the fan once we get the top piece on. And now same thing on the other side. I put a little bit of the foam safe glue on that back section just to make sure that we don't melt it. And then hot glue on the underside. Use that slot again to hold it, and same deal, get the front edge in on that biro line and then drop the rear into place with the push down, and then that side piece firmly in against the fuselage. Just turn that around, so I'm just pushing that in there firmly down. No excess glue there, they can just squeeze out, tidy it up, and there we go, we've got two vents. So there we go, so there's our side intakes that are going to take air straight into the fan, with cooling over the ESC on one side and with our slots in place where our servos are going to go later. So now I'm going to fit the ailerons into these little cutouts here in the side, the servos for the ailerons. These are little plastic gear, 9 gram for the ailerons. I'm going to use metal gear for the elevator, certainly, because that's a bit more critical. But the flight loads on these are pretty light, so these cheap lightweight servos are just fine. Now this is slightly fiddly because we've got to poke that wire through there, and then we've got to get it through the cutout on the inside. And the easiest way to do that is to get a pair of pliers like this. So there we go, now I've got a good hold on that, and I can just gently feed that through like that. There we go. In fact, on the final version of the plan, I'll make this cutout slightly further forward so you're not working in that such a narrow space. And now I can pull that wire through. And there we go. And now on this side here, let's move you around. So we can see now that will just slide, pop in there. And then to put it in place, I'm just going to drop a little bit of hot glue down behind each one of these little ears on the servo. And then when we push the servo back in place, that'll squeeze the glue against the side of the fuselage, and that's more than good enough to hold it in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'll drop a little bit of hot glue just on that upper wing surface there, and I can push the wire down flat into the hot glue, and that'll just stop it from flapping around in that airflow once everything's closed up. Okay, so I've got my servo ready to go here. So pull that stand out of the way. Let's just drop a little bit of hot glue behind each one of those tabs on the side. Give it a moment to let it run down a bit, so it's going to go all the way to the bottom, and then gently push that servo into place. And that glue has pushed all around those sides, and that's now held firmly in place. And now when I pull the wire through, let's get it so it sits flat on the base. There we go. So I'm just going to drop a little bit of glue, maybe 2 drops, 1, 2, there we go. And then just with the back of this blade, be careful using blade, if you've got something blunt handy, that would obviously be better. And we're just going to push that flat down into that glue. There it goes. And that will stop that wire moving around in the airflow. just move and give you a close-up of that from above. So there it is, little dab of blue glue just on that wire in the center there. That servo's in place, and I'm going to repeat the same thing on the other side and feed the servo wire through the hole that I've already got the ESC wiring going. So there's both servos in place with the wiring feeding through into the center. A couple of quick final words on servos. Firstly, before you put them in, check they're working. Either connect them to a servo tester if you've got one, or hook them up to your receiver, because everything gets much more inaccessible as we start to finish the model off. So when, for example, we get the tops of the side intakes in place, then all that wiring is starting to get quite tricky to get at. So check they're working before you put them in. And also you'll see that the servos are not symmetrical. So the servo arm is closer to one end than the other. And you put the servo arm at the front of the aircraft. This is going to be the nose. That lengthens the control rod slightly and gives us a slightly better angle on the movement. If you put them too far back, you put them the other way around, it's not the end of the world. The plane will still fly great, but it puts slightly more load on the linkages. It's not a biggie. If you put them the other way around, doesn't matter, go ahead, it's going to fly fine anyway. But this is my preferred way of fitting them. So those are glued in place. On to the next step. Next, we're going to start closing up this central fuselage area and adding a bit of much needed strength, because you can see at the moment these side panels at the side are somewhat vulnerable. So we're going to get three pieces of foam here. Firstly, there's this very distinctively shaped upper cover that's going to go on there, and then there's two fuselage doublers that look like this. So this piece sits in the center on the top there. What that does is it closes off the upper side of those inlet ducts, and it gives some support to these side pieces and gives some strength. And then the fuselage doublers fit down in here, glue to that side and give some extra strength. And then this also serves as the side for the canopy hatch. So what we're going to do, we're going to place one of the side pieces in without any glue. We're going to slide this upper cover forward until it's just gently touching the back of the doubler, and then we're going to take the doubler out and get a biro and just mark. I've actually already done it, you can see. Put a little biro mark each side where the front edge of this piece is, so then we can position it accurately. So now what I'm going to do is get my hot glue gun. Let's get that out of the way. I'm going to put glue on the two sides of this, and then on the upper surface of the inside of the air intake. I'm going to get another piece of hot glue here. Just going to pause the video while I reload my glue gun, because this is quite a long piece, so I need lots of glue. Okay, glue gun is ready to go. So let's do those upper surfaces inside. Nice bead of glue along the top there. Oh darn it, that didn't work so well. Never mind, let's just keep on going. Same again on that inside edge. And then each side of this piece here, and we'll just about make it with enough glue. That's lucky. Now we're going to use our biro marks to get this correct front and back, and we're going to go down one side first like that, and then push down to the other side, and then those side pieces can push in. There we go. So it's funny on the flight test videos, their hot glue stick when they're glued on never falls off. Maybe that's just me. Okay. I'm not going to get too bitter about it. Okay, so now those sides are much stronger. That's glued in place. And now we can move on to our first side doubler. So that's going to fit in there. So we're going to put glue. It's a little bit squeezed out there already. Look at that. We're getting a head start on the glue. So we're going to put glue on the inside face We're going to be careful not to put too much because it will melt the foam. So, and remember that this upper section here doesn't have any surface to glue to. That just sticks up, so they don't want to put glue on there. So along there, and then another go, and then a third go probably, and then we can glue that in place and push against that side panel and push against the side panel here. And this is going to need more hot glue, so let's try that again. Bit of glue on the back there, bit of glue on there, give that 30 seconds, and I'll try and keep it vertical to take the load off it. There we go. Okay, so bead of glue straight along, can do a second one straight along, third one, fourth one. Let's do a little on the bottom. Let's do a little on the bottom there, where it's going to go on that side piece, and a bit on that front edge. There we go. And now we can move our wiring out of the way and drop that into position. Bit of excess glue we can squeeze out of the way with our fingers. It's not too hot. If you get the hot glue on your fingers when it's straight out of the gun, then that can be quite nasty. You want to be very careful because you can burn yourself. But once it's been sitting in place for a few seconds, then it's really not going to do you any harm, apart from it's a bit messy. So there we go. Let's just make sure that's firmly squeezed in place. There we go. So that's going to stiffen up that front piece, because obviously you've got lots of weight here because the battery's going to be there, and if you crash, the nose is where you're going to expect to take the hit. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So this piece is going to go in there. So same story. Little on the bottom, little on the front edge, bit underneath there. That's good enough. So, wiring out of the way, drop it into place. And again, get some nice wide flat side pressure on there, get that glue really squeezed into the join. Put a little bit in that front corner where I've just been a little bit light. Use a bit of scrap foam in there, clean that up, there we go. Right, so there's our doublers in place and our upper section. Let's turn that, there we go. So now we can get the bulkhead B1, and it's got a big cutout in the bottom. That's to give you space if you need it to slide the battery backwards underneath this upper cover. If you're using a lightweight battery, maybe only a 2200, then you're not going to need that space because the battery will be further forward. But if you've got something quite heavy, I'm flying off a 2800 4S at the moment, and I do actually slide that just back underneath there to get the CG correct. And we'll talk about correct CG later on. So let's just make sure that that's going to fit nicely in place. Now we've got to get our wiring out of the way because we don't want to get glue all over the wiring. And what you can see is that pushes back against this upper surface and should fit when it's vertical quite neatly up against the back of these side doublers. That all looks absolutely fine. So we want some glue, and in fact, let's make life easy for ourselves. Let's put it back into place. Get a biro, put a mark along there. That now shows us where the mark is. It should sit just along the top of that cutout. So what I'm going to do is a bit of glue on the side and the bottom, and a little bit along the back where it's going to sit on there. And then this is going to be a bit messy. This wiring is going to get in the way. Too. What I'm going to do, let's get a piece of painter's tape and pull that wiring away from the side just to keep it in position centrally. There we go. So now I don't have to worry about getting glue tangled up on there. So glue gun, glue down each side. So bead of glue down each side, along the back, along that line, and then little blob, bottom each side. And I'm going to go in at a slight angle, put one corner in, and then walk it back on the other side. There we go. And then let's just try and get it nice and vertical. Make sure that's pushed down, that's all good. Get a little bit of glue on that side panel, but it's on the inside of the plane, nobody can see it. And as I've said so many times, if you're building a plane to be super tidy, this is not the one. So there we go. That bulkhead in place. Wiring can feed through with space for the battery if you need it. And that box structure at the front where the battery is going to go is starting to get some strength to it. All good. Okay, so now we're going to finish closing up this rear portion of the jet. And there's a couple of things we've got to do here. Firstly, we've got to fit the rear former F3, which I've got here. And secondly, we need to fit our thrust tube. Now, there's two ways you can make that. There's a template on the plan, and you can make one out of thin card or plastic. People use, I think it's called Mylar, the thin plastic sheet that you get on the cover if you have something bound for a presentation or a school project or something, but thin card as well. Or otherwise, if you've got access to a 3D printer, you can 3D print one. I'll share an STL file. So this is lightweight PLA, and it tapers down to 55mm diameter at the back. That's about 90% of the fan swept area. The narrower you make it, the faster the jet of air will be coming out the back, but the less thrust you'll get. And for an easy hand launch, I've gone for slightly larger. If you're more interested in speed, you could probably go down maybe another 3 or 4 millimeters. I wouldn't go much more than that. And you'll see that I've cut a little piece out of the front. That's to allow the wires to feed out of the motor, you can see there. And now the other thing we need to do is we're going to cut the circle out of F3 to match the diameter that we're working to, which is 55mm. And you'll see what you'll end up with F3 is effectively 3 separate pieces, a bottom corner on each side, and then the top piece. So I'm going to cut that circle out, and then we're going to glue those 2 bottom corners in first, and then we can fit the thrust tube. There's our circle cut out of F3, and you'll see that that is a nice match for the top of our exhaust. And the benefit of having a nice sharp blade means those edges are pretty clean. They're good enough anyway. So now let's fit those two bottom corner pieces. Actually, they're just held together into one piece, but doesn't really make a lot of difference. So we're going to put those into that bottom corner, and then we can fit the duct. So I'm going to break these apart into two, and let's do our first corner. So they're going to go like that. So first piece, and again at the very thin part, be careful with the hot glue, because if it gets too hot it will melt and you'll have no foam left. So that's the first corner to push into position there. There we go. Now these edges at the moment were slightly tilting inwards, and fitting this will just straighten those out. There we go. Second one. Same story. Push that into that corner. There we go. So being careful to push right outside and to keep this side now nice and vertical. Okay, that should be set. And now we can test fit our thrust tube. So I'm going to drop that in place, rotate it round so that slot lines up with the wiring, give it a little bit of a jiggle, and there it goes in. There we go. And then we can see when that drops in place in the top there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now, so at the moment this fan is just a friction fit. So just to hold that in place, I'm going to put a little bead of glue around the edge of F1, around the top of the fan, just in that corner there. And also around F2. Piece of scrap foam, and just squeegee that into the gap there. Same on the other side. So that will hold that fan in place, doesn't take much. And I'm now just going to have one more test fit. So I think those wires are just stopping that going quite far enough forward. So what I'm going to do is just with my knife, I'm going to trim just a couple of millimeters more from each side, and then I can probably just snap that off. Or even just have to be very gentle with this because it's lightweight PLA. It is quite delicate. See what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pull that off. There we go, because it'll separate along the line of the layers in the 3D print. There we go. That's taken about another millimeter out of there. Let's test fit that again. Rotate it to get those wires in place. Okay, that's better. Happy with that now. Yep, that's good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of glue along this lower surface so I can drop the thrust tube into place, and then I could put a little bead of glue around the top here. In fact, I could even put just a little bit. You see I've left the flat surface in the 3D printing. I could even put a little bit around there, but I'm a bit nervous of getting glue into the fan. So I think discretion is the better part of valor. Let's not bother with that. But I can just put a very light bead of glue around that rear section there. Rotate that so it locks into place. There we go, and then I can push forward and lower that into place. Perfect. Okay, really happy with that. And then a little bead of glue on this top edge all around that joint there. And again, a bit of scrap foam just to squeegee out the excess glue. That's going to set, that's going to be held nice and firm. Okay, that's not going anywhere. And then now to make it really secure, I'm going to drop in this last piece F3 in the back here. So with our glue gun, bit of glue down each side, and then very lightly around the bottom, because again that 3D printed is a little delicate. Don't want to melt it. Got a bit too much there. Let's just squeegee a bit of that excess glue off. There we go. And I push those sides apart just to let me get that in place. And then in it goes. Bit of excess glue off with the fingers. Just going to move that around slightly, make sure it's nice and flush. Make sure it's sitting against the thrust tube, and there we go. So now we've got the thrust tube fitted, connected firmly in place. Bead of glue at the top just to hold it, and then it's very firmly held pretty much all the way around at the back. And you'll see it just protrudes slightly from this rear bulkhead, so we've got a nice sharp edge for the flow. Somehow in my head that helps for aero. I have no idea if that's accurate or not, but hey, it works in my head and that's good enough. So next step now, we can start on this upper surface and we can start to close all this section out. Now to close out that upper section, we're going to need our tailplane. So the first thing I'm going to do, similar routine to what we did for the ailerons. You can see I've transferred across the biro marks, the center line. These lines are the edges of the fuselage, and then along here is the hinge for the elevator. So I'm going to get my straight edge lined up with that hinge line, and with my blade I'm going to cut very gently, because I'm aiming again not to go all the way through this time as we did with the ailerons. And now let's see if that will hinge back. Not quite, so gently I can go a little bit firmer. And again, if you do go through, it doesn't matter because you're going to hinge this with tape anyway, but it's neater if we can keep the top in one piece. There it goes, that's just starting to go. There we go. That's got a hinge line. Now, we now need to put our tape on there, which will give us a stronger surface for the hinge. And it also will help stiffen up this tailplane. centrally equally positioned front and back across that join. Again, get a cloth or a duster or a handkerchief or something, and we can smooth that down. There we go. And again, like before, when you put it down, try not to tension the tape when you press it, because when you do and you let go, it'll pull in and it will give a slight up curvature to the tailplane. But at the moment, pretty happy with that. That looks okay. And I'm gonna just then trim the excess away from each end. Now, if you want, you can get some sandpaper and you can curve the leading edge to give you a bit more streamlining. If you want to get a jump start on that, what you can do is get a metal edge and just put a small 45-degree chamfer in with a blade. Let's do that on both sides. You can do this on the wing as well, just to make it look a bit more streamlined. It'll probably give you slightly more speed. I doubt anybody's sensitive enough to be able to spot it in reality, but it's a thought that counts. There we go, and the same on this side. So we're just taking a tiny bit off, which will just reduce the amount that we have to do by sanding, because the sanding's quite a messy process and makes a lot of small bits of foam dust. So I will finish that edge off. So I've got a slight curve now.
Powering off.
It's my speaker. I've been listening to the radio going off there. That's nice. So that gives me a slight curve to the leading edge. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to tape the underside as we did with the wing with coloured tape, which has two benefits. Firstly, it'll help with visibility, and secondly, it will help with strengthening this tailplane. So in aggressive maneuvers, if you're the kind of person that does aggressive maneuvers, it'll stop this snapping. So we're going to do this the same way we did before, one piece at a time. I'm going to just start at that front edge. There we go. Smooth it down. So there we've got front to back. There's a tiny bit at the back that doesn't have any tape on, but I'm not too worried about that. So what we can do now is get our blade and just very carefully, so we don't cut the foam, go along here and just trim that to remove the excess where it's overlapping. There we go. That's the trailing edge done. There's one bit where the blade's not quite gone through. There we go. Okay. And now the front edge, we can actually go sort of slightly at an angle here with the blade, because if you remember, we've slightly chamfered that leading edge. And then around that corner. There we go. And as I said, if you don't round the leading edge, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. So same thing on this other end. Vertical down there. Let's just get that piece out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. And then here, we're just angling the blade slightly underneath, just very slightly catching the foam. Yes, tiny bits. You can see on that chamfer coming away. And there we go. So now we've got a slightly curved leading edge, and that's much stronger. Now it's got the foam on. Now you'll see what we've just done. I've done this in the wrong order. I should have taped it first and then cut the hinge, but it doesn't matter because we'll just put the knife in place again with the blade from there. Let's see, where is our hinge line? It is there. So the good news is, because we had the biro mark, we can still see it, so this is not going to do us any harm at all. And then we can just very gently with the blade just cut through that. There we go. Now what we're going to do is we need to cut our 45-degree relief as we did for the aileron, because at the moment now when this goes in place we can pull up elevator but we can't do down elevator. And because this rear piece is the thinnest and potentially the weakest part, I'm going to cut the bevel on this front section. So let's get a couple of bits of scrap foam. These are the circles out of the formers where the EDF went, and the reason I've got those is because I can prop up to keep everything flat and level there. That's good. So same as before when we did this on the aileron, and again, better take off too little than too much at this stage. Gonna go slightly less, in fact just move that a millimeter in, there we go. So angle the blade, there we go. And now we should be able to just clear that stuff out of the way. Pull that up. There we go. If you've got a few lumps and bumps, you can sandpaper those out of the way just to give you a bit of extra clearance, or you can have another go with a knife. But usually a little bit of a squeeze will just compress whatever little bits of foam you've got getting in the way. And now I've got up elevator and down elevator, and you need more up than down movement. So you don't need a full 45 degrees, probably a 30-degree deflection is enough. But I will actually sand that just to give me a little bit more. In fact, no, I think that's good. That's enough. A bit lower, there we go, that should be enough. So now this piece is ready to be fitted to the rear of the fuselage. Okay, time to close out now this upper section. So we're going to get the next piece of foam. It's the upper panel, so the mid tier I think I call it. It's got a slot cut out here, which is where the fin is going to locate. So we fit that on the top there, that's going to go like that. And then just to double check, I'm going to get my elevator and put that, which follows immediately on behind it like that. And I'm going to lift up and fold over the elevator, and I'm just going to check that the bottom piece isn't forward of that edge. If that was a few millimeters forward, then I couldn't get down elevator, because when I tried, the elevator will hit the fuselage here. So we should have a clean edge, so we can put glue along the top there, and that is going to slot in place, and it all looks fine. When I check it, I put that in place, lift that up, and I've got a nice flush edge right across the back there, so that's absolutely perfect. So first piece we're going to put on is this rear deck. Now there are some long glue joins in here, So make sure your glue gun is fully heated up. Make sure you've got plenty of glue in, not like I did before with that stick that came out. And we're going to put glue down the two sides and then a little bit on this front edge where it's going to push against there. So let's go. So I'm going to try and work quickly here because we've got a lot of surface to do and we don't want our glue to go completely hard. 1, 2, a little bit on the front, and then straight into position. And let's get that pushed down nice and firm. Get a piece of scrap foam as usual, and where that glue is oozing out the side, squeegee that off, and both sides. And then make sure my sides are nice and flush. Got a little bit of excess glue there. Okay, that's looking good. So now we can move on to the rear here and to our tail section. What I am going to do is I'm going to get my biro. I'm going to transfer the center line, which is currently marked on the other side, to the top. There we go. And same at the rear. I'm going to get my pen. Let me just, okay, there you go, you just see there. I'm just going to put pen line straight down there because I can now use that just to make sure that when that's pushed up firm against that front edge, everything's lining up nicely, which it is absolutely perfectly excellent. Right, so what I can do here, so the front edge I'm going to put glue onto the tail plane, everything else I'm going to put glue around those 3 sides with my gun. So 1, 2, 3, and then front edge down there. And let's align that front edge nicely like that, slide across and then push that down. And then scrap foam underneath, a little bit of excess glue. Okay. So clean up this work surface slightly, and now we have what is beginning to look like a jet. So that's all coming together quite nicely. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fit these side pieces on to close up those air intakes, and that gives us those vents through. But before we do that, we're going to make one small adjustment, and this is entirely optional, but I'm going to move the camera for a close-up so you can see what I'm going to look at. Now here's my air intake, and you can see at the moment there's this dead space in the back here and a sharp edge on there. On the other side we've got the same thing with the added complication that in my case I've got a huge ESC, so I'm going to struggle for airflow anyway, but we'll talk about that later because we can add some cheat holes to get some more air through the fan. But what I'm going to do is get a couple of scrap pieces of foam. I'm going to cut them to the same height as this, and then I'm going to fit them in place and just manually trim them to fit round the servo, so I can put an extra piece in just to streamline that edge there. So I'm going to get a piece of scrap foam, do some rough cutting with my knife, and then show you what it looks like. So here we go, scrap piece of foam, same height as those side intakes. The top surface, you'll see, has got an angled edge, just like we did at the rear of those side intakes. And you'll also see that I've cut a sort of angled square cutout where the servo is going to go, so that, excuse the wobbly camera work, if I drop that into place in there like that, there we go. So I'm going to hot glue that. I'm not going to film it because it's very hard in that tiny space to show what I'm doing on the camera, but I'm going to make one of those for each side and glue them in place, and that then just smooths that airflow into that. So there it is, glued in place. So when we look down our intake, we've now got a smooth feed into the fan. Because you're probably going to, lots of people only use different size servos. So I haven't put this on the plan because you need to cut them to fit whatever size servo you've got. The side cutouts I've got here are for a standard 9 gram, but you might have something different. So this is optional, it's a little fiddly. I think it's worth doing. Just get some scrap foam, get a biro, and if it doesn't work on the first attempt, have a couple of goes, and eventually you'll get the hang. And just whittle a bit of foam to do the job. It doesn't take long, and it's worth it to get that clean intake. Although, as I say, in the case of this particular jet, because that ESC is huge, I'm going to struggle on this side for that level of blockage on the air jet. And we're going to talk about cheater holes later on. Okay, with those side intakes tidied up, we can now put these top pieces on to close off those side intakes. So let's just quickly test fit. It fits, so the point goes flush with the front of the side panel, and the kink where it goes from out to in should just about line up with the top here. And if this isn't quite vertical, you might need to push that edge slightly out at the top. But that looks to be fitting pretty much okay. So make sure your glue gun has lots of glue in it for this piece, because we've got to glue all along that back edge, which is a long way, and then along here, and I'll put a little dab on there as well. So that's a lot of glue, and we're going to need to work fairly quickly because the glue is going to cool down. So all the way to the end there, and then all the way down the side here on the top. Oops, missed a bit. And then a bit on the inside piece as well. A bit more on that forward edge. There we go. Okay, we're all good. Back corner in. Lift that front piece. There we go. Push down, make sure that's in place. Just any excess glue can slide out. And then make sure that front surface is straight. That's pushed up slightly. I'm just going to slide that down. There we go. Okay, that's now square. There we go. So now I've got a closed off air intake, and if I look down I can see in that square box that curves inwards, kinks in and straight into that fan at the back. This left hand side I've got a beautiful clean run. The right hand side I've got that massive ESC in the way. As I've said, we will deal with that issue later. So other side of the plane, same thing, we're going to go on from the back, push onto there, so same story. Glue down this surface. And then again. There we go. Get that back corner in, top in place. Push that down on there. Push that in place. A little bit untidy there. Let's get some scrap foam and just pull extra glue out of the way. There we go. There we go. So that's now closed off those air intakes and has stiffened up the sides of the plane considerably, because now you've got these big, quite sturdy box sections. So this is all becoming pretty solid feeling, which is good because it's going to have to fly and possibly survive the occasional crash. Now I've got a few choices what to do next. We can put the servos on the top and start to connect up controls for the rear. But we've also, you've probably noticed, the front of the plane still isn't looking very streamlined. So I think, as it's looking kind of ugly, let's start to make this a little bit aeroplane shape. So next we're going to move on and let's fit the box on the nose. So to start to make the nose of the plane, we're going to get the two lower nose side pieces and the nose box interior piece with this cutout in the front. That's just to give more space to slide batteries forward if you're running very light batteries. Now, if you are familiar with any of the flight test aircraft or videos, the next step you will recognize, because we're going to glue these panels to the side of this piece, and you'll see that there is a curve. So we need to curve these pieces, because otherwise you can try and hold them on there with hot glue, but it'll want to pop away. So we're going to put a permanent curve into each of these nose pieces. And the way you do that is you put it on the edge of the table with your hand flat, and you very gently drag it back over the edge with a little bit of downward pressure from your hand, just squeezing, and already there you can see that's starting to put a bend in. Have one more go. There we go. And now, when we push that on the side there, much easier to make that fit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get some glue on the side of this nose piece. And I've drawn a reference line, horizontal line on the nose. And now I can stick that on the back there, and then pull that nose piece all the way in. I'm just going to use that line to make sure that I'm straight, and then from the back I'm going to have a look and make sure that I'm at right angles and everything's nice and square, and I'm going to hold that in place, keep the pressure on there while that glue dries. And usual story, bit of scrap foam, just squeeze the excess glue out. There we go. So that's the first side panel on, and at the back they're flush in line with each other. And now I've got one on other side, and we've got to be careful to make sure we curve it the right way. So it's going to go on there, which means it needs to curve like that. There we go. Let's put a bit of a curve in the piece, and that will fit quite nicely. Now the way we're going to do this one is we're going to stand it on its back, and then you can make sure that everything is square. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to line it up alongside like that. I'm going to get my biro, and I'm just going to make a mark there, so that when I stand the two next to each other, I can see up down where that needs to sit in order that it goes on there. So with that ready to go, hot glue on the side. Put that in place on there, and then mount that vertically on the table. Just make sure my, whoops, there we go, that biro line is correct. And I can use the squares on the table to make sure that these two pieces are also at right angles to each other. So that is looking good, and they are nice and square. There we go. So that gives me the beginning of the nose structure. And now you can probably guess the trickiest part of the whole build is we're going to curve a piece of foam around the front. And this curve here is going to be quite tight. So what we need to know about curving foam that tightly, and get a scrap. In fact, let's get 2 scraps. So the first scrap, I'm going to just try and bend that over the table. See if I can get a nice tight corner. That's starting to go around, and I can bend it. Oh, there it goes. Snap. That's the problem. So to eliminate that, here's what we do. Let's put a piece of tape up the outside. Gonna get those side pieces off just because they're quite annoying. Now you remember that we put tape on the underneath of the wing and the elevator. So the reason we did that is now when I try and bend this, that tape is going to stop that outside surface from cracking. So let's do the same thing. Let's run it over the table. Let's start to put a curve into it. Let's get quite aggressive, pushing down hard on the edge of the table there. And I can now bend that right the way around to a really sharp bend. Push that on there. There we go. And no cracking. No cracking because it has tape on. And then when it's in place and it's all glued in place, then obviously we can just take the tape off. So that's what we're going to do next. But before we do that, let's have a think. I think it's going to be easier if we do this without mounting the box on the plane itself. So firstly, we're going to curve a piece of foam to fit over the front. So let's go and get a piece of foam. So here's our front box structure, and here is the piece of foam that we're going to wrap around the front. Now you'll see it's not been shaped, the curve in and out, because it's tricky to get it precisely right. Depends how hard you push these down and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit it and then trim the edges afterwards. So firstly, starting at the back, we just roll it to see roughly where the sharp point is. And again, if we get a biro, which is up there, there we go. So we mark where that point is. So this is where the sharp curve is going to have to go. And what we can then do is tape the back full width tape, as you can see, this is maybe 100, 150 millimeters long, 4 to 6 inches, 4 inches, just to make sure that we've covered off where we're going to be curving it tightly. And we're going to curve around that. So the bottom bit needs a little bit of a curve and the top needs a little bit of a curve, but that corner there is where we need to bend it right back. So firstly, we'll do a gentle curve all the way along. And you can see, there we go, it's got a gentle curve. And if I put that on the bottom already, that would come in quite nicely. And now this portion here in the center is where we need to get that to curve really tight. So we start to work that. I'm going to pull it with my one hand, push it with the other, and start to work that around the edge of the table. Let's go from the other side a bit. There we go. So we can see that starting to go. Let's work that a little more. Right back. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my fingers and just press in the foam there and gradually work that over tighter and tighter, knowing that this tape is going to hold that outside surface together for me. And then what we can do, there we go, is we can just start to gently. So what I'm doing here is I'm pushing down really quite hard on the inside of the foam to basically squeeze that back surface in. There we go. And that is beginning to give. So now you can see that's starting to bend around to that shape that we need. So let's do our first test fit. So let's put that on there. And let's pretend that we're ready to go. And I can push that up and around and down the other side. There we go. And there you see, that's beginning to get that shape quite nicely. There we go. Now, if you're not in a hurry, if you put a piece of tape over each side to hold that tight bend, it'll take that over time and it'll gradually settle. And when you take that tape off again, it won't spring back. But in the interest of time, I'm going to go right ahead. Now, the other thing you may notice is this centerpiece is square and it's sticking up slightly proud. So what I'm going to do is get my knife and I'm just going to trim away at 45 degrees. Take that top edge off just a little bit. Same again on the bottom. There we go. A little bit of hot glue excess there as well. There we go. Okay. So now, get that the right way around. How are we looking? That can glue right there. And then that's going to push up and over and stop there at the join where the top piece of the canopy is going to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the bottom and just along the bottom of that piece there. And we're going to glue that, let it set, and then when everything's in place, we're going to pull the top piece over. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to favour the inside of this surface rather than the outside edge. So what I mean is, I don't mean I'm going to put it on this surface, but I'm going to try and be, instead of being in the middle, a bit on the left hand side here, right hand side there as I'm looking at it, in order that we don't squeegee too much glue out to the side, because that will be a bit messy on the outside. There we go. bottom of that front piece. There we go. And what we're going to do is mount that square flush on that edge, slide that back. A little light on glue there, that's not sticking very well. I'm going to have to put a bit more on that side. That's because I didn't put enough glue in there. There we go. Because it was such a light bead, it cooled down too quickly. There we go. And now, because I am going to be trimming that side off, I want to make sure I really do get the excess glue out from there. There we go. There we go. So now we can fold that top piece over. And I'll be a little bit more generous with glue, having learnt the hard way. That around with my hand right on the top. I keep this front, particularly just the top edge of the curve. I'm sort of pushing really hard here with my thumb. Lock that into place. There we go. And I'm going to hold that tight for probably 30-40 seconds. Let that glue get nice and solid. And once it has, we can remove our tape and then we can trim those side pieces. So, and you'll see now with that around the front, that's become, before when you just had the T shape, it was, or the H shape of the frame, it was quite bendy, but now it's closed up with that curve around the box. Suddenly that's become super rigid. So now, get our tape. It's a bit tricky to get the edges up, so let's just get a knife. There we go. We can pull that off. One. Try not to mark the frame. Two. There we go. There's the beginning of our jet shape at the front. And now what I can do is with my knife, I can start to very slowly and carefully trim that front piece. There we go. And we don't need to get it absolutely perfect because we can sand the last bit with some sandpaper, which is quite easy by comparison. So there we go. So a sliding back action works best. There we go, that's one side. A little bit lumpy there at the front, so we've got a little gentle sliding slicing action. There we go, that's one side done. Do the same down the other side from the top. We just caught a little bit of the side piece, but that doesn't matter because we're going to sand that anyway. And there's a little bit there that's just a bit light on glue, so I'm just going to let a little bit of hot glue dribble down on the top there, and I'm going to squeeze that down into the join with a bit of glue, and then just hold that in place while it sits. So just keep a tiny bit of pressure on there for 30 seconds. Till that glue's had a chance to solidify. There we go. Now when we're finished right at the end, we're going to just round off these corners very slightly because we haven't got any strengthening on the inside corner, so we can just slightly take the edge off, makes everything look just a little bit less boxy. And we can smooth up these edges when we do that. There we go. But you can now see we've now got a nice streamlined curve on the front of the plane. So we can now fit this nose onto the front of the plane structure. So now we've got our fuselage back, and we can just line our nose up here and make sure that everything fits and there are no big gaps anywhere. Again, it's not super critical, but that looks to be fitting all right to me. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put glue around the three sides of the square and a little bit on these two inside edges of the block, and you'll also see we've got this piece that pushes forward through from the inside, so we can also put a little bit of glue on this face here that will then push up against that, and then we can slide this back into position. And usual story, let's have a piece of scrap foam ready to go, and we'll squeegee off the excess glue when we get there. So going to be quite generous comparatively this time around, just a bit there, along the bottom, back of those two pieces there, and then squidge along that bottom surface. There we go. Now I can lift this, drop that bottom surface in place, and then slide that back into position and push the two firmly together. And then with my foam there, let's just try and move around and squeezing out. And I'm now going to keep some pressure on there for about 60 seconds. And then it makes a good job to move it a little bit, because if a bit of squeezed out of the bottom, then you might stick to the build surface. So by just sliding it before the glue is set completely, you can prevent that from happening. And now, there we go. Now we've got our nose section in place. And the only purpose this serves is just to give some streamlining to the front. But now we can start to see, so we can see the full size of the plane because we've now got the full length in place. And we can also start to see how that shape is coming together. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on and we're going to fit the servos for the rear surfaces for the elevator and the rudder, which isn't fitted yet. And we're going to fit those servos on the top here. Okay, so here's my two servos that are going to operate the rear surfaces, including the elevator, which is one where you want the most power. So these are going to be metal gear servos. So they're a little heavier, a little more powerful, a little faster reacting than the ones I've got on the ailerons, where the loadings are relatively light. Now what we're going to do, if you have these with the wiring coming out and pointing forwards to shorten the run to the receiver, and you put them opposite sides, so horn on the left on one, horn on the right on the other, and if we put them sort of side to side like this, and then we gradually slide across until we're almost touching the wiring of the second one, that gives you what the spacing is going to look like. So if I can grip them like that, that's how they're going to go. Straight on the top there. And I've already made a pen mark from the plan to show how far back they need to be. And I'm just going to eyeball them on the center line like that. So that's where they're going to go. And actually what I'll do is I'll just put some biro marks so we can see where they go. There we go. So that's where our servos are going to be. So a little bit of hot glue on the bottom, and we'll glue our first one in place there. You can scratch up the case to get a better glue surface if you want. Give the glue something to bind. It's not super critical for this particular application. The reason being that we're actually going to have is, let me just press that down quite firmly in place, hold that still for a few seconds. They're going to have another piece of foam over the top, which is sandwiched between this piece and the top of the plane. So if you think that they're always twisting, they're just trying to rotate or slide back and forth, and they're going to be held in place front and back by that foam and above and below, so they really can't move. So the glue that I'm putting in on the underside here is a bit belt and braces, but hey, that's good enough. So that's one, and then that's going to be number two just there like that. So let's put another blob of glue on the bottom of here, just about that much glue, and push and slide. There we go. So there's my two servos, and now this is the servo support. This is a piece of foam that's now going to sit over the top and follow down my center line. It's going to go that way around, so the high end to the front, because we've got a sloping top piece that goes down to the bottom. So what I'm going to do here is just put a bit of glue on these two surfaces where it glues onto that mid deck. And we don't need any more glue than that, because just by its very presence, that is now holding those two servos in place. There we go, push that down nice and firm. So they are now, when the top surface is on, so this now won't be able to rock back and forth, can't move back and forth. Those are going to be absolutely solid. So there's no chance of those things moving. And what we can also do, as we did before, so these two wires are going to come through that slot and drop into this area where we're going to put our receiver. So as we did earlier, we can just put a couple of little blobs of hot glue to hold this wiring in place. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a couple of biro marks to show where that's going. And then I'm going to put blob number 1, 2, 3. Wiring pushing into 1, 2, 3. Let's push it down nice and flat. There we Now the other one, I'm going to make sure that I route it over the top of the other servo, and I'm going to tuck it just inside that little lug, just so it doesn't move and get, I'm going to move this around so you can see. I'm tucking it just behind that little ear on the servo so that it doesn't move and get caught up in this control horn when we get there. And I think, let's just see which way it sits most neatly. Can go that way. I think that way. Yeah. Okay. That seems pretty tidy. So same thing, we're going to come straight out to the front here. So let's make a biro mark. 1, 2, 3. Same story on the glue. Blob. 1, 2, 3. And let's get that wire pushed into 1, 2, 3. There we go. Let's make sure that's pressed in. Down at that front edge. There we go. And now I've got those wires are not going to get in the way of anything. So the next thing we need to do before we can connect these up, the one last significant piece that we're missing that would make the plane unflyable is we need a tail. So let's go and get our tail and hinge the rudder, and then we're ready to fit it and start to hook up these control surfaces. So now we're going to move on to the rudder, and here's the piece of foam already cut out, and by now you'll be familiar with the routine. So this is very similar to what we've already done. So firstly, I'm going to cut these 2 slots at the top and bottom of the movable rudder section. Actually, if you wanted to, you could extend the rudder all the way up to the top of the tail. I've drawn it slightly smaller, but it's, if you are particularly a big fan of flying knife edge, you might want to expand it a bit. On the topic of which, because this rudder sits so high above the center of the plane, there is quite a lot of roll coupling, which means when you put rudder on, it'll also tend to make the aircraft roll. So you've got to either put a mix in your radio or compensate with the other stick, or like me, just do really bad looking knife edge and then get away with it. Okay, so now we're going to lightly cut again, aiming not to go all the way through. And let's see if that rudder will hinge. Not quite. So same routine as before, we go in a little firmer just to deepen that slot slightly. Try again. There she goes. Okay, perfect. Now once we've got that hinged, we're going to go and put our clear tape. So I'll just grab a piece of tape. So slightly longer than I need it. And let's do that just up to the trailing edge. There we go. The excess off top and bottom. Now you remember when we curved the very tight radius on the nose section, how much stronger this foam is when it has tape on it. So what we're going to do for the rudder is we're going to actually put tape on both sides. So this piece I'm going to put slightly ahead of the rudder, so it's just up the side of the rudder piece itself. If you've already got a colour scheme in mind for your plane, then while the rudder is not fastened to the plane, if you're going to use sticky vinyl or tape to put colour on, you can actually use the tape here, the strengthening tape, also as your decoration, and you can put some colour on while the piece is off the plane, which just makes the process that much easier. And then I'm going to get one last piece. So I've now got tape up one side of the rudder itself, and in fact let's just recut those slots through the tape so I can show you. So on this side here I've got tape running down the back, and that's given me my hinge. I've now got tape here running in front of the rudder, and I'm going to put one more piece on this side in front now of that hinge section. So I've got quite a good tape area on both sides of the rudder, just to give a little bit of extra strength. Now, I don't think or expect that the forces that you're going to get in flight will require this. I think the rudder mostly is not taking a lot of force, it's just keeping the plane pointing in a straight line. So that's not necessarily the reason to do this tape on both sides. The real reason I'm doing it is because if, like me, you have a tendency to clumsiness, then when you're loading the model in and out of the car or in and out of wherever you're storing it, it's very easy to be careless, as I am. And if you knock this, that tape now at both sides just makes it far less likely that this is going to break. So now we've got a hinge. Now we need to cut our 45-degree bevel in order that this can move both ways. So same story as before, I'm not going to bother the close-up because we've done that, you know how this works. Angle the blade. There we go. How does that look? That looks pretty good. Yeah. Okay, and then the last thing we will need to do is grab our little piece of, I've got just a scrap of control rod material, and again just slide it up and down each of those slots just to open up that foam very slightly. Perfect. Now I'm just going to make a decision, is that enough rudder movement in both directions? I've got about 30 degrees there. Maybe I want slightly more. So in which case what we can do is just, I'll use a bit of sandpaper on that edge and just allow that to move slightly further. Actually, I've got a strip here with a bit of sandpaper on it, so let's just very gently okay, that's gone a little further. That's more than enough, I think, for what I'm going to need. Okay, perfect. So we're now ready to either put the rest of your decorations on or mount this to the plane. And the same as on the wings and tail plane, it's probably a good idea for drag just to slightly round that leading edge. And I'm going to do this the same way as I've done it before. I'm going to start the job by just taking a tiny sliver off with the knife at 45 degrees on each side, and honestly that would be more than good enough if you want to leave it there. Slightly further back, there we go. So So that's already given me some shape on that leading edge. What I'm now going to do is just with this bit of sandpaper, let's just slightly take those two sides off. The tape is slightly preventing this at the top, and I'm not too worried about that. You could always trim the tape back if you were bothered. Sorry about the sanding noise. And that's enough. That's given me quite a nice radius down the front. And what the heck, let's treat ourselves. Let's do the top as well. Same on the other side. Good thing about doing the knife is also that helps take the tape away. Same routine. Just take that little bit of tape away from that corner. That will allow me to get a radius on there. There we go. Same on that side. Just a little soaring action to get going in the tape. There we go. Let's go. Just pull off, and then we can. There we go. Pretty happy with that. Now we can clean up our little bit of sanding debris and fix that to the fuselage. So let's glue the tail fin onto the back of the fuselage here. So you'll see there's a locating slot in the front edge that's going to drop into the slot in the top piece. And we've got our center line that we transferred from the plans marked in biro, and we can run that down to the back of the fin and make sure it's sitting exactly straight along. So that means fore and aft location is easy to do. Now we also need to make sure it's vertical. So I've got my square, so I can put that on the side here and make sure that I'm putting this on straight. But if you haven't got a square like this, as I've said, you can use a CD box, anything. In fact, even probably this tape. Let's try that. Yeah, I could use that roll of tape along the side there, and that would be good enough. But just because I've got it, I'm going to use my square. So let's pull the fin out. We're going to put glue along the bottom surface of the straight piece here, and then down each side of that front tab. So there we go. So all along the bottom there, and then one side and the other of that tab. A little bit on the front, a little bit on the back. There we go. So drop the tab in first, and then drop that down centrally onto my marked biro line. I'm going to push that rudder out so I can push down, and then I'm going to use my square on the side here. Okay, there we go. I'm going to leave that in place, keeping this downward pressure. For 30 to 60 seconds, something like that. If I get a piece of scrap foam, I can just touch that bit of glue and see if that's starting to go firm. Yes, it is. So I can just remove the last little bit of excess from down the side just as that solidifies. There we go. Perfect. Now let's double check again. That is nice and square. Perfect. So that is our fin installed. Now if that feels like it's not much to hold it in place, when our top deck is fitted, there's another layer to go on the top to cover up the servos here. That's going to give more side support to the fin and give that some extra strength. So when we're finished, that's going to be more firmly located than it is already. But even as it is, actually you'd be surprised how well that will stand up to flight loads. Loading in, loading the car, that's where the risk is, but otherwise we're good. Okay, next step, I think we're going to connect up the control surfaces. Let's get all the wiggly bits wiggling to make sure that they work. So first of all, I'm going to connect up the ailerons. So what I've done, first of all, is I've made a little control rod. I've bent that so that from the servo arm, the hinge point here is directly over where this aileron hinges. And I'm going to go into the third hole up on the servo. It's 10 millimeters from the center up to that third hole. So that's how much movement I'm going to use. And now you'll see that when I fit my aileron horn, because of the shape, because it has this sort of step in it, the hole where the connector goes through is in front of that point, so I can step back from the hinge line and the hole will be directly above the hinge point. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a biro. I'm going to position that. I want that to be about, let's see, about there. So then I'm going to put that down on its side and I'm going to just mark with a biro. And then I'm going to just double check if that looks to be about right. Yeah. And then what I'm going to do is with my knife, I'm going to make a very, very light cut. And then another one, about 1.5 millimeters off to the side. And then I'm going to do that at the front and the back. And what I'm going to do, so I'm just going to pull up the tape that's on top of that aileron. So that exposes bare foam. And then I'm going to get a bit of the connector wire. And I'm just going to squash that foam down a little bit to get the job started. Because that's exactly what this servo horn is now going to do. It's going to push down into the foam. There we go. And you'll see these 3D printed connectors have got this little shelf on to give a bit more glue area, but that's not essential. And if you haven't got a 3D printer, you can cut these out of plywood, thin plastic. Even if you've got old credit cards, just cut with scissors to this shape, punch a little hole through for the whole connector, and that will work just fine. So there we go. I need to hook that over. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my wire in there on the outermost hole. That's the amount of control movement certainly that I like to fly with. You might want a little more or less, but that works fine for me. And I'm just going to lift that up slightly. Some scrap foam either side, just so I can push down nice and firmly without the table getting in the way. There we go. So now my servos are actually connected and they're set to neutral. So with that setting, I need this aileron to be flat. So let's get our glue gun. Let's put some hot glue down into that crack. Let's put a little bit more on the underside of that shelf. And then let's push that down all the way in, keeping that aileron level. And now let's give that plenty of time to set. And actually looking at that, that probably should have maybe been 10mm further back. I've got a bit too much of an angle on that control rod. Doesn't matter, it'll work just fine. But if we're aiming for perfect, so I'll go across, just repeat the same thing on the other side. And actually with that glue, having just had a moment to set, all good. Now onto the elevator and the rudder. Moving on to the elevator and the rudder. So for the elevator and the rudder, third hole out on the servo horn again. I had the maximum on the first prototype and that was way too much movement. I ended up normally flying at about 45% rates. So this will be much more sensible. I've got a slightly thicker wire because particularly for the elevator, I want a good strong servo response. I've got some thin plastic tube around which I'm going to have glued into the top surface, which you'll see in a minute. And at the back, I'm going to use these little linkage stoppers which I can slide on and off. So let me move that camera across. There we go. So you can see we can slide that on. It's kind of fiddly at a distance. Oh, come on. There we go. And that means we can adjust mechanically as well as on the trim on the transmitter. Now I've got this servo centered, so that's the correct position. I can trim off the excess on this wire in a minute. Now I'm going to do the same thing as last time. Step the edge of the servo horn slightly back from the hinge so that the connector is above the hinge point. Same thing, 2 slots, hollow out the foam, glue in the control horn, and then there we go. Same on the other side now for the rudder. Okay, so there we've got everything connected, powered up. Let's just test everything. So we've got elevator, the ailerons, we've got rudder, and we got power. So this would be flyable in this state, but we're going to tidy it up a little bit more and then we're ready for maiden. So we're very close. Okay, we're going to finish streamlining the front end of the plane. Now we've got the curved nose on, and we're going to make the pop-up battery hatch. So there's 2 side pieces, there's 2 little cross pieces, rear and front, and then there's a piece that we're going to curve gently on the top using that same technique on the edge of the table. So first of all, let's get the front of the battery hatch, and what we're going to do is we're going to join that to the side, and if you slide that forwards until eventually the front corner and the sloping down hatch piece are exactly level, that's where we're going to put it. So a little bit of glue on the side, and then exactly level, and I'm just going to slide that on the base so that the glue doesn't stick to my building board. There we go. Good enough. And now we're going to put the other piece, and we'll just check using our squares here that this is all going to come out square and level, and it is. So we want the 2 pieces to be the same length square, so this can slide backwards and forwards, and it should be that if you've cut it out accurately, if I put it where that front is level, the back sits just level there as well, so that's working just fine. Oops, sorry, I meant to do that. Bit of hot glue on the side, put that back down, side piece on there, and to the same position, and then push into place. once again slide on that base plate just to stop. I mean, if it does stick, it's quite easy just to peel it off, particularly as I'm working on this plastic surface. There we go. Now they're not 100% straight and square at the moment, that's okay. We'll deal with that in a moment. And now we're going to put our rear piece across, and that's going to go straight across the rear and flush across the top. And I'm going to glue both sides at the same time. 1, 2. Let's just hold that in place for a moment. Make sure that that rear surface is flush. There we go. That's starting to sit a little bit more square, but we'll finish up the squaring process, because when we put our top piece on, we'll have this forced down onto the table, and then this top curve will hold that nice and square. So, same issue as we've had before. We need this to curve along the top there. So curving mainly here, and you'll see that I have cut this slightly long. On the plan, I'll give you a length based off this piece, which I will measure. So let's just put that so I can go over the end of the table. Let's just see if that's going to fit, because I'm going to trim this to fit once we get onto the aircraft. There we go, that fits just fine. So, working quite quickly. Glue down both of those top surfaces. Across the back, and then just a little bit on that front corner where that's also level. There we go. I'm going to sit that on my edge just because mine's slightly too long. Sit that square on that rear edge, get that nicely positioned, and then push that down all the way along. There we go, a bit of excess glue. Any excess glue off the side there. Press that down all the way along. And there we go. And that gives us our battery hatch. And what I'm going to do now is test fit that onto the aircraft itself. So let's pull up the plane. Let's point that at the camera a bit so you can see better. Let's tuck that power cable down inside. And you can see now that this sits and drops in place in front of that upper deck. And I can just put a quick biro mark there. And there. Let's move the aircraft out of the way again. You can see why I get so much hanger rash. I'm just going to trim that, and as I say, if you cut exactly as the plan, you won't need to do this trim to fit, because I'm going to base the final plan off these pieces that I'm cutting right here now, so yours should fit. But if you want to leave it slightly long, and then adjust it to make sure it fits neatly. That's also going to be fine. So put that in place. So I can afford to take maybe another 0.5 millimeter off there. That would push down, but it's a little tight. Probably the best way to do this is the same way I did that last time actually. So I'm just going to put that on there. Let's put that in place. Going to take off about 2 millimeters. There we go. Tiny thin bit of foam. Okay, and that now fits just fine. So there is our smooth nose, and this is going to be hinged at the front, so this lifts up the battery access. So now moving backwards, I'm going to take, we can actually take that off for now, because this is going to go flush with the edge of that top piece there. So there we go, that's going to sit straight down the side, and it can curve slightly inwards at the tail where the plane has that tapered shape. So same again, working quickly because it's quite a long seam. Hot glue all the way along the piece. I've just realised I'm probably out of shot here, apologies for that, but there's only so many times you need to see somebody sticking glue on the phone before you know what they're doing. There we go, on that front face. Now let's get that vertical and then slide that inwards at the back. Push it into a little there. And then a piece of scrap foam. Let's go all the way along. Pull off all that excess foam, excess glue rather. Make sure that's going to push out. There we go. Okay, so you can now see the shape of the plane emerging. That's going to slope down there at the back. Same again on the other side. Let's make sure we've got this the right way. So that is the bottom. Hot glue along that surface again. Let's try and stay roughly in camera shot. I don't know if that's going to work. Let's go halfway and then hold it down here so I can support it a bit better. You see that foam is a bit flaky at the back. That doesn't matter because we can, it's only sitting between these two surfaces, so once it's in place it's going to be more than strong enough. Scrap foam, all the excess glue off. That piece of foam is slightly weakened at the back here because it got attacked by my cat that likes to chew it. So word of warning, if you have cats, keep the foam away, otherwise it'll get eaten. Now we can add bulk of B2, which sits above B1 here at the front and goes behind B1, sits flush on that mid deck and just glues these two side triangular pieces in firmly, so that all seems to fit. So bit of glue down each side and along the bottom, and then also a little bit down that front surface. let's go in one end first and then into position. There we go. Excess glue out of the way there. There we go, that's perfect. Okay, so that's B2 in place, which will now sit behind our hatch here, which hinges up. That's all good. So all we have left to do now is to fit our top deck, which is actually one of the more fiddly processes. So let's get ourselves organized and ready to go. Okay, we are nearly done. We have our top piece that goes on the rear. It's got these two little slots cut out that are going to allow our controls for rudder and elevator to pass through, and the slot for the rudder, which is for the fin and the rudder, which is going to give some more support at the back there. So we're going to glue this on the top. Now, during the course of this build, you probably end up thinking to yourself what fantastic stuff hot glue is. So quick and easy to put this thing together, and you would be, of course, absolutely right. However, the other thing about hot glue is that it cools relatively quickly, and we have got all along there, bit in the middle, top, sides in the back, and we have to thread these guys through here. So we've got a lot to do in a small space of time. So this is the one piece of the build where I would recommend you do not use hot glue. I did the first prototype with hot glue and it worked, but there were a few bits where you could see the glue had already hardened before I'd got it pressed down, so we don't have a particularly good bond. It doesn't matter because this is just giving some streamlining. It doesn't really add much strength, if any at all. But for the purposes of this one, I'm going to try and get this one a bit more tidy. So here's how we're going to do it. First of all, I'm going to get my control horns. They've got this outside sheathing on them, and just to cut down the friction for the servo, I've put a tiny little bit of chain grease for bicycles onto there just to make that slide a little bit more easily. So we can poke that one through there, and let's do the same with the rudder. So we lift that up, pokes through there, and then I'm going to pull those forward out of the way just to give me some clear workspace. That's good enough. Now, here's my foam safe glue, which has the advantage of not going off instantly. So I'm going to put a bead of this down this left hand side here. And I can take my time a little bit here because unlike the hot glue, I'm not working on such a tight time. Same down the other side. I'm actually going to stop because I'm going to do a little bit of this with hot glue. I'm going to stop right at the bottom there. And then again along the top of that central support. So I've done the full length of those two triangular pieces and along that central support. And with that ready to go, I'm going to put my lid back on. And now we're going to do the little bit we're going to do with hot glue that's going to grab everything and hold it in place while we fit everything else. I'm going to move my hatch out of the way just so I don't accidentally glue the hatch along this front edge, because the front edge under here, I'm going to put hot glue, and I'm also going to put hot glue in a line extending this side piece just about 2 or 3 inches left and right, and I'm going to put the same at the bottom of the fin, left and right, just starting where that piece, the triangle piece, ends, which just overlaps the front of the elevator. So here's my hot glue gun, and working quite quickly. Should have just about enough glue there. There, and last but not least, along that front edge. There we go. And now we can spin that round, slide it on the fin, drop it down onto that front surface, and push down. Whoops! Let's slide back and underneath that control horn. There we go. And now I'm going to push down, most particularly where I've got that hot glue there, either side of the fin. And you'll see I've got these control horn outers poking through as well. And what I can do there is just now put a little hot glue around the edge to stop that sliding along relative to the metal horn. A little bit of excess hot glue there. Let's just smooth that and tidy it up. There we go. Okay, I'll do the same on this other side in a minute, but that hot glue is set at the front and the back, and then that side glue will just go off over time. If you wanted, you could put a little masking tape to hold that down, but given that it's already held at the front and the back, I don't actually think there's any need. So with that, we pop that front hatch back on. That, when we reconnect those control surfaces again at the back, that is a flyable plane. Okay, time to do a few small tidying up bits and pieces. Now here's our canopy. We're going to hinge that at the front with some tape in a moment, but also you might want some sort of hold down to hold it in place. Because it's hinged at the front, the airflow coming on the plane is going to push it down anyway. But if you're a little uncertain about that, then what we can do is add a little either magnets or Velcro to hold in place. And to do that, you'll need a little flat section. So first of all, on the canopy itself, in one corner or another, cut a small piece of foam, because what I'm going to do in here, I'm going to mount that flush with that surface. And I've cut another piece that's just the right size to sit underneath and hold it in place. Let me show you what I mean. So I'll get this first piece. These are just cut some scraps of foam. I'm going to put that in there. So let's put a bit of glue down that side, a bit of glue down the bottom. And then I'm going to put that in place in that corner right there. So there we go. And that now gives me a surface that I can mount this piece on, that I can glue onto there, and I can glue onto that back surface. So it's the same thing again. We're going to glue along those two sides and a little bit on the top surface of that piece there. And then we push that into place. Okay, so there we have a piece of foam. I'm just going to get some scrap, squeeze you off that excess glue, push that against that back wall and the side wall. There we go. Now I'm going to use Velcro for my canopy, and the Velcro itself has a little bit of thickness, so I've mounted that so it's slightly up. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap, so when I do the piece on the aircraft flush, I've left 2 or 3 millimeters of gap. So I've got a shelf now in that corner, so now I need to go and get the airframe and do the same thing on the inside of the airframe. Okay, here we go. As you'll see, I've started to put some markings on the plane just to brighten it up a bit. So in this corner here, same story, a little bit of glue around two sides. And then we can push that into position. There we go. Again, just take that little lump of glue, which looks a bit messy. So that now gives me a surface there and a surface here, and when this hinge comes down, they come together with a little gap between them to allow for my Velcro. If you put them, so you can put a magnet on one and a little piece of metal on the other side. I actually cut a small piece off the lid of a food can. That will work just fine, doesn't matter what you use. So you can use magnets, you can use Velcro, whatever you've got lying around. But now we can see that canopy is ready to be hinged at the front. So now to hinge the canopy, we're going to use clear tape at this point, but we're actually going to put, I'm going to put some black vinyl on here later to simulate a canopy. But you can see I've already started doing some markings on the plane just to make it easy to see and make it look cool. And you can choose any old design because it's not a scale plane. You don't have to choose a scale scheme, so you can make it any way you want. So let's get a piece of tape. And this is going to be just the width of the front of the aircraft there. With that canopy firmly in place, going to push that tape down across the front there. Now I've made that deliberately slightly too wide because I've got some greasy finger marks on that side. So there we go, that comes off. So that gives us now a hinge, and now on the inside with the canopy down like that, I'm going to get another piece of tape, make sure it's not too wide so it will fit in that space inside there. Going to hinge that across the top there. Make sure that canopy is straight, push that closed, and then I'm going to push that down across that join and then wrap it underneath. And that stops that inside edge pulling away when the canopy's open. There we go. And now I can put some Velcro in that back corner, and that'll give me a nice easy operation for the canopy, lots of space to get my battery in place. Okay, so here we are at the flying field and we're going to get this plane in the air. So there are two critical things that are going to stop you having a good experience with the plane. First of all is you need to get the plane balanced correctly at the center of gravity. Now the CG is marked on the plans, and on the plane here you can see there that I've put a mark on the wing on each side where the center of gravity needs to be, and the CG is a front rear mark. So when I pick up the plane at that point, if your hand's big enough to reach over the top, for example, if I grab at a line between those two CGs, the plane needs to be balanced. Now you can see at the moment it's very tail heavy, but we don't have a battery in. So let's open our battery hatch. I'm going to start off with a small 2200 3-cell. This plane will fly on a 3-cell. It's a bit slow, but you could get airborne. And I'm going to put that in there. And that's going to be positioned quite well forward. We'll have a look in a minute. I'm going to close the hatch just to get the weight of the hatch in the right place. It doesn't need to be locked down completely. And I'm going to pick that plane up at the CG, and now that's balancing. So you can see that that's just rocking around that central point. So that's nicely balanced. And I'll show you where that battery is. Whoops. So it's poking just through into that front space there. So that's a lightweight battery is the furthest forward position you're going to need. A slightly wobbly tripod, there we go. So let's go to the other extreme. This is a 2800 4-cell. So this is a big heavy battery. I wouldn't fly this plane really on anything much bigger than this. It'll probably take a 3000, but I haven't tried it. So 2800 4-cell, much heavier. If I put this in the same position, this plane's going to be really nose heavy. So what you do is just slide the battery backwards and forwards until you find the point at which the plane is balanced. So let me have a go here. Let's try that. Pick that up again at that CG point. That's probably slightly nose heavy, but it's pretty much balanced. Once again, let's take a look. And now you see the heavy battery is pushed underneath that rear bulkhead, which is why the cutout is there to allow you to get a battery through. So that's the rearmost position. So your batteries are going to be somewhere, a mid-size of 2200 4-cell is going to sit right in the middle of that battery compartment. If you're flying something lighter, it'll need to go a little bit further forward to get your CG. If you're flying something heavier, it'll need to go backwards. So the first step, put your battery in the plane, slide it backwards and forwards till you find the right position. Mark with a biro on the bottom so you can see where it needs to be. And then you need to have some means of making sure that it stays in that position in flight. And for that, what I do is I have a little bit of self-adhesive Velcro on my battery, and I put some self-adhesive Velcro on the floor of the plane, so the battery is held by the Velcro and it stops it sliding backwards and forwards. And for extra security, I would recommend putting a thin sheet of wood. Again, those craft sticks but even popsicle sticks, anything on the floor of the plane. Hot glue that to the foam and then put the self-adhesive Velcro onto the wooden stick. I find that just sticks a little bit better. Sometimes the Velcro can peel off the foam. So, step 1, CG correct. Step 2 is, do we have enough thrust from the fan? So we're here at the flying field and we're going to have a quick chat about cheater holes. Now, cheater holes are ways to get extra air into the fan to increase the thrust of the fan. So at the moment, if you've just built the plan straight from the jet, straight from the plan, you haven't added any cheater holes, you're relying on getting air in those side intakes up to the fan. And that works. And on a 4S battery on the fan I'm using, you'll get 650 grams of static thrust out of the fan. Now your jet probably weighs about 8 to 850 grams with a battery on board, depending on what kind of battery you've got. So you've got less thrust than weight, but that's plenty to fly the plane. So you can just fly like that. But if you want better performance, then we need to get more air into the fan. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. If you've got access to a 3D printer, I'll share the file for these side intakes. You'll see they've got angled vents in them, big square rectangular things, lots of area, and you can actually see straight through into the fan inside. So if you put even one of those on, you'll get pretty much unobstructed access to the fan. But I'm a nerd, so I've got two because it's symmetrical, and otherwise it give me a funny feeling. So you can do that. But actually, if you haven't got a 3D printer, don't worry, you don't need to, because there's another way you can do it. So what I've done on this jet here is I've cut these side vents. It's a vertical line at the back, and that cut has been made at 45 degrees, so the air has a smooth flow in against that edge. And then you'll see there's a curved line above and below. That's just done with the knife going straight in. And then all I've done is I've just pushed that in, bent it a little, and then what I'll do is I'll put a little dab of hot glue just there and there at the top, just to stop that coming out again. And what you need is about a clear 10mm gap at the back between that angle slot for the air to go in. I've got one of those on each side of the plane, and that gives me extra air into the plane. They're less visually noticeable than the 3D printed, and they also don't need a 3D printer. So if we look how the effect goes, fan with no intakes will give you, as I said, about 650 grams of static thrust. Two of these 3D printed on either side, you'll get over a kilogram, probably 1.05-ish on the battery and fan that I'm using. But with these simple cutouts, you'll get about 950 grams. So almost as much as putting the 3D printed vents in, and at more than 900 grams thrust, that's more than the weight of the plane. So from a performance point of view, this plane can climb vertically. So if you want to do loops or split S's or cubonates or whatever, you've got vertical performance now out of the fan, having put those slots in. So you can fly it with no side intakes at all. You can fly it with these little slots cut in the foam, which visually aren't too bad. If you want absolute maximum performance, then you need to go all the way out and open them up and put the 3D printed vents in. Your choice. Personally, for quick, easy, to get 90% of the performance and not have to 3D print, I'd cut these vents. The jet is finished. We've got our cheetah holes cut. We've got our CG checked, so our battery's in the right place. We've done a range test, so the only thing left to do is to fly.